I call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, March 13th, 2023, and the time is 6 p.m. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Welcome members of the community here tonight to observe the important work being done on behalf of all district stakeholders, and welcome Noel in the audience. Dr. Hillman, we have some items in the table file.
Yes, we do. This evening, we have some additional detail about some items with the priority-based budget process, including a presentation that Principal Greg Jeleno will share about the potential 6-period day at the middle school, some transportation and busing information, and some more detail about the Northfield High School proposed FTE reductions. We also have quite a few personnel items, including appointments, increase, decrease, change in assignment, leave of absence, retirement, resignations, and terminations. I do just want to make one point that in this evening's table file, I'm happy to share that we do have a candidate for the Director of Special Services that we are asking you to approve. So that's a good move forward. That is the table file.
Thank you very much. If there are no objections, we will add these items to the agenda as we move forward.
We just should maybe mention that Ben is on Zoom here too. Yeah.
Yes, and then Ben Miller is also joining us by Zoom tonight. Okay, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Jeff, second by Amy. I will have to call a roll call vote so that we can hear everybody, including Ben. So Anita, will you facilitate that?
Butler.
Aye.
Coleman.
Aye.
Gurwitz.
Aye.
Gonzalez George.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Thank you, Ben.
Nelson.
Aye.
Quinnell.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. We're now on to the public comment portion of our meeting, and I do have a couple of people signed up. I will read our public comment script and then call you up by name. This is an opportunity for residents, business and property owners, parents, guardians, students, and employees of the Northfield School District to address the board. All comments to the board must adhere to the guidelines set in place by District Policy 206 regarding public comment. This is not a time to debate an issue, but only for the board to hear your comments. You are prohibited from making comments about specific students, staff, and administrators. The board respects and values input, but when it relates to a specific individual or a specific matter, this input must be heard by the appropriate personnel, including the building principal or superintendent, and not during an open meeting of the school board. You will be gavelled out of order if your comments are not in compliance with these guidelines. Please address the board from the podium after being recognized by the board chair. Identify yourself, and if you represent a group. We require that you limit your remarks to 3 minutes. You are not allowed to yield your time to another person. It is expected that members of the public will address their remarks with civility and respect. Personal attacks by anyone addressing the board are unacceptable. The board has allotted up to a total of 30 minutes for public comment at regular school board meetings. I will now begin to call those who have signed up to speak in the order in which they signed in. Vice Chair Corey Butler will be monitoring the speaker's time. He will signal each speaker with the time they have remaining at 1 minute, 30 seconds, and 10-second intervals. Again, please make your comments as brief as possible, but no more than 3 minutes. And we have Gunnar Johnson. Welcome, Gunnar.
Hello, I'm Gunnar Johnson, an 8th grader at the Northfield Middle School. Thank you for the time, and also thank you for adding an ag program to the Northfield High School. I can't wait to take the class. But that's not what I'm here for today. Today, I'm here for the subject of the removal of sports in the middle school. I've heard that you guys are thinking about taking them away to help with the budget because of low enrollment. In my opinion, that would make the enrollment even lower. This is because a lot of people come to the school for sports. If you remove these activities, our high school sports team will have less people in those sports, and our school will be less recognized for people who are finding places to move to. To add to this, my 2 younger brothers are in wrestling and football and are looking forward to doing these activities when they're in the middle school. I would be disappointed if they cannot do these sports in the middle school. Also, sports are very helpful for the physical and mental well-being of our students in the present and the future. If we take away these sports, some kids will not learn the social skills I have learned from these sports. I'm one of the kids that benefited plenty from these sports. I didn't have many friends and was pretty isolated. If I didn't do these sports, I probably wouldn't have as many friends and definitely wouldn't be as happy and healthy as I am now. Without sports, our school will not be the same. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Right, Julia Breland. Okay.
Sorry. I have ADHD. I apologize. I'll try not to run over and I'll try not to break your rules. If I do, just let me know and I'll change what I'm saying. Hi, my name is Jules. My pronouns are mama and wolf. I want to start by saying, if you're over 18, I do not care what you personally like, but for our kiddos, we have a few questions in regards to these books. Specifically this one. Did you know that who approves these books provided in schools for our children? Did you know that kids with learning difficulties gravitate towards easy to read books like graphic novels? I'm here to address and review of books that have less than a 4-star rating for educational purposes. Children have access to public libraries for books that aren't just for entertainment. I'm finding it difficult to teach morality with content like this. My kids were able to find these books in the high school and middle school libraries. Maybe teaching our students that adults can hurt you when giving you alcohol, illegal substances, or to say no and get help. The language being used is derogatory and it's hard for me to read out loud. But the underage drinking is the most alarming. Wouldn't you agree? The pictures and discuss about these topics in children's books that are rated 14 plus in a library meant for 11 to 13-year-olds. Why is a school library exposing this to our children under the legal age to even give consent to reading the book? Alcohol is legal for under 21 in Minnesota and should not be glorified for children. Hypersexualizing children during puberty causes a misrepresentation of what children at the age of 15 and under are doing with other children and adult portrayal for that matter. Let's talk about what we don't have. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Where is this book in our schools and public libraries? At least they haven't taken Pilgrim's Progress yet. Or how about the removal of Dr. Seuss, If I Ran a Zoo? Wasn't it removed for indoctrination of hate against a group of people? This would have been a book I read in 1996. Having Pilgrim's Progress in school was said, not having Pilgrim's Progress in school is such a disservice to our children for moral reasons. But this is what we're keeping. Let me read a few pages, or one page specifically. And I want you to tell me how you feel about it after reading it. David. Oh, there he is. Jesus, don't shit yourself. I'm just making friends with Charlie. Yeah, well, we're busy. Fuck off. All right, all right. Keep your tits on. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I just wanted to meet the guy who turned my little brother gay. What? My mom told me. I'm bi, actually. So what? I'm bi, actually. So you're gonna be gay? At least admit you're gay.
Thank you, Julia, for sharing that. Appreciate you coming out tonight.
This is smut. Unbelievable and disrespectful to the children.
Thank you, Julia. We
community.
appreciate your comments. Okay, we're on to item number 4, announcements and recognitions. Dr. Hillman, do you have any announcements?
We have no announcements nor recognitions this evening.
Right, board members, do you have any announcements or recognitions or awards? Okay, item number 5 tonight is items for discussion and reports. And our first item is our proposed priority-based budget reductions. There are additional resources that were provided in the table file tonight. The board will continue to review the proposed budget reductions for 23-24. Northfield Middle School Principal Greg Gelano will review the impact of a 6-period day at the middle school. Welcome, Greg.
And I'm going to do a little framing first before I have Greg. So Greg can come to the to the podium, but I want to just, because we have people who come to this conversation at different times, I just do want to review where we are at with our budget process. So Greg, if you can just hang out for a few moments, and we have several items tonight that we are providing greater detail for you based upon board member feedback. But it is important for us to take a step back and come back and review where we've been. So we want to just explain that, we continue to work addressing two real serious issues that impact our budget that are upstream from us at the state level. So the two major things that are impacting our school district's revenue are declining enrollment and chronic state underfunding. So as I've shared with many people before, we have been recognized as a district for not only good, but excellent financial management. We've earned a very prestigious AA+ bond rating from Standard & Poor's. You've heard our auditor reports each year that explain excellence in school finance, but even schools who are well-managed cannot outrun declining enrollment and chronic underfunding. So just to give you an example of how enrollment is a serious problem, since 2018-19, we have had a decline of 245 students. In general, that means about $2.45 million less in revenue. There are two reasons for declining enrollment. The first of which is we are seeing a lower birth rate across the country in Minnesota and specifically in Rice County. In addition, we know that we have a lack of housing in our community. So when people even are looking to move here, it's very difficult to find housing. In fact, today I just got an email from a Portage parent who was explaining how difficult it has been to find housing within the city of Northfield. We know that the state has not kept up with inflation. So if we look at the basic formula over the last 30 years, if the state had simply kept pace with inflation, we would have approximately 10% more revenue in our budget today. We all know that in regular inflationary pressures real, so our costs are going up just like everybody else's costs are going up. And finally, the special education cross subsidy is another financial pressure that we have that is substantial. And so what a special ed cross subsidy is, for people who are new to the conversation, that is the amount of money that we pay from our general fund to support legally required, and I would argue morally imperative services to students with disabilities that is not reimbursed by the state or federal governments. In Northfield, that's about $5 million a year. So these pieces are the reality of where we are and where we are at. Last year, we started a new 5-year budgeting process. And so trying to not just to be looking at this year to year, but coming together with the community to set priorities for how we budget for a 5-year period, a period that would align with our strategic plan adoption. So last year we had over 70 staff, students, parents, and community members who participated in community-wide priority-based budgeting teams. They gave recommendations about the 3 different budget packages that we work with about what should we fund first. And so that was something that came forward last year with over $4 million of recommendations for reduction over a couple of year period. This year, we went back and used those same priorities as the administration made a recommendation for an additional $2.5 million in reductions. And so we are at a point where some of those priorities do conflict. So things that are important, there can be multiple things that are important, but when you are looking at making sure that you're staying within the parameters that we've set for our budget, sometimes those things come into conflict. So that is where we are at today. Again, we'll talk about the public meetings that we're going to have in the next couple of weeks. We'll talk about it at the end of this part of the presentation. I do want to point out just a couple of items that were modified since the last set of recommendations. So in your packet, you're going to see that we have some alternate recommendations specifically in the secondary package. So we know we have received a lot of feedback about the middle school activities, and I can plug in here, and if you can cue me up, that'd be great. So the couple of items that I just want to show you here, and I'll just describe them while they're coming up on the screen. We, Val Mertersdorf tonight we have in the packet some information about a methodology of increasing activity fees, both at the middle school and high school, in a way that would allow us to maintain the middle school activity structure as it is. understanding that when we increase fees, and I will be straightforward, there's a variety of different approaches to the fees that would dramatically increase them in order to raise the revenue to be able to offset as much of those expenditures as we could. Of course, not a perfect solution, but it is one of the few areas where we have the ability to raise fees to support programming. And so in this case, we would also need to do work with the community to make sure that there's a scholarship program. There's a reduction in fees for students who qualify for free or reduced lunch, but we need to work with community-based partners to ensure we will not turn a student away. If a student wants to participate, we will find a way to make sure that they are scholarshiped. But this was feedback that we got from a number of people in the community and even from members of the board asking us, what could we do with a fee structure to be able to maintain the middle school activities as they are? I do want to point out that one of the things that we had said as a consideration, if we were to eliminate the current model of middle school activities, would be a community education-based program that would offer student activities based on student choice after school. And Aaron Bailey, our Director of Community Education, is here tonight if people have questions about that. But we have given you a tool to be able to maintain middle school activities as they are through increases in fees. Another area that we did also, and that's on line 22A and 22B in your packet. And then when you take a look at line 14 and 14A, some understandable concerns about the potential elimination of the activity bus. The activity bus is something that goes school to school to allow students to get from the high school if they have a practice to the middle school, et cetera. In this case, we had already been proposing to increase ticket prices for admission to high school activities by $1. We would increase the gate fee or that admission price to activities at the high school by an additional $1, and that additional $1 would raise enough funds to be able to maintain the activity bus as is. Those are the alternate recommendations that we are providing for you here tonight. I do also want to share that Val will go through in a few minutes about the potential transportation options that we're looking at. But I did want to share that in the packet table file, we also had some more specificity around what would be included in the 3.1 FTE reduction at the high school. So in the secondary package, one of the components, in fact, the first line item 3 was reducing NHS FTE by 3.1 FTE, again, based upon enrollment. And so in the table file, we did list for you today where we think those FTE would come from. The high school program is based upon registration. And so what we are looking at is a reduction in 1.0 FTE in mathematics. And for people who, an FTE means a full-time teaching position. 1.0 in mathematics, 1.0 in social studies, 0.4 in French, 0.2 in English, 0.2 in music. And what I want to be clear with this is that Paul Owsley, our longtime and excellent orchestra teacher, is retiring. So we're getting ready to post that orchestra position. And the orchestra, the position that Paul has is full-time. 8/10 of it is orchestra and 2/10 of it is a music theory course. There are only 13 students that are signed up for the music theory course for next year. So we would post the orchestra position as 0.8 as opposed to a full-time. To be very clear, the orchestra part of the program is staying exactly as it's been. It just, we wouldn't offer that music theory class because of low enrollment. And that aligns with what our priority-based budgeting committee said last year about making sure that we are looking at those courses that are low enrolled. And so again, the orchestra program would be exactly the same, but the teaching position would be slightly less. We would offer that music theory course again the following year. And if there were enough people to register for it, that position could be full-time. So that's where the 0.2 in music is coming from. There'd be 0.2 in physical education and 0.1 in credit recovery. And while we really, all of these reductions are difficult, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, even with those 1.0 reductions in mathematics and social studies, the overall class size estimates are manageable. And so there would be some larger courses, those would, or larger class sections, but those would typically be in some elective areas or a singleton course. A singleton course is a class that we only offer once during the day. So a lot of those are AP courses, a lot of those are, so I want to share, those are the things that we are looking to reduce as part of that 3.1 FTE reduction at the high school. Notice that you're not seeing career technical education courses there. You're not seeing art, you're not seeing things like that. So there's But this is what the registration demonstrates would be the appropriate 3.1 FTE in reduction. So I just want to share that as we frame, because that's new information. So as we said, I'm going to have Greg talk a little bit about the possibility of the 6-period day. I would be disheartened if we have not been getting emails or concerns from people in the community, because what we have is an incredibly special system and everything that we offer is valuable. It is disheartening for us to have to make these reductions. And I will say it I am sorry that we have to do this. We have done everything that we can to avoid significant budget reductions over the last decade, while many other districts have had to do so. We've pulled every community lever that we have available to us. At the end of the day, this is a structural funding problem from the state. We are not the only school district that is experiencing these kinds of reductions. It ranges from significant reductions in school districts like as large as Wayzata to significant reductions in districts as small as Dover-Yoda. And so the fact is many school districts, if you are in declining enrollment or you're staying the same, boards across the state are having these difficult conversations. Everything that we offer is valuable to someone in the district. So I would be disheartened if people were not upset by the proposed reductions. The challenge that we have is we have to make sure that we have a quality school district for the entire future. So that means stabilizing our budget now to come to grips what will end up being our new reality for lower enrollment. So as we frame this, we just want people in the community to know there's nothing about this that doesn't stink. That's just the way to say it. It is a very difficult set of circumstances, and we have to make the best decisions that we can based upon the feedback that we've gotten from the community and in a way that stabilizes our budget so we can continue offering excellent programs as we move forward. So with that, I do want to have Greg talk about the 6-period day, and Tim will bring up his slide deck, and he's going to share with you just a few examples about the 6-period day.
Well, thank you for inviting me today to talk about a 6-period day. A little bit of background is just so the board knows and people listening online or that are here in the audience today. When I was given this task to come up with a reduction of the middle school budget, I spent a considerable amount of time going over multiple scenarios, as well as I did did a Google form and asked for feedback from our staff. So I kind of as well gave them a bunch of kind of 10,000 foot view of things that we have control of in the middle school and said, hey, I ultimately have to make the decision, but I also want to make sure that I'm not missing something. Maybe they had a better idea or idea I hadn't thought of. So I did send that out, and I had 68 responses from our staff saying, hey, here's some things that I thought of based on what I gave them. Here's a priority that I'd like to see. And I've taken that information to kind of make sure that it aligned with what the proposal is that I brought forward. I did make it very clear it wasn't about it. I didn't share results with anyone. It was just information for myself to look at, to make sure I was bringing the what I felt was the best proposal forward. But as Dr. Himmelman said, it's not an easy one for sure. So a 6-period day is a pretty significant adjustment to our school day. We currently have 7 periods. So, and it looks a little bit different in 7th and 8th versus 6th. So my task is to walk through some of those differences for all of you that are here. So in a 6-period day for 6th grade specifically, we currently have 2 teams in 6th grade. And in those teams, each of them have 5 core classes. And a 5 core class, if you have 5 core classes, and then the 6th one is actually a PE, which is a requirement. And we partner that with health. But in a 6-period day, that doesn't work, because in order to do that, you wouldn't have any room left in your schedule to take the musics or to take Spanish specifically. So in a 6-period day, you have to take those 5 core classes for each team, and you have to drop it down to 4. So in looking big picture, that's going from 10 core teachers in 6th grade down to 8. The one that came forward the most was combining reading and writing. That's to be what everyone went to right away, to combine those 2 pieces, which is why I have that on the screen. And you still see the Phi Ed and the art still stay partnered together because we have maroon and gold day schedule. So they're every other day classes. And that still frees up now, similar to this year, a one period where students can take electives. Now it gets a little complicated. And there's not a great visual for this. For students to be able to take two musics, you notice, okay, it's not, because in this case, musics would have to go to every day, which I'll explain in a minute. So it becomes complicated in the sense that I've talked to the music teachers and said, hey, what can we do for students that want to take a band and a choir, or an orchestra and a choir, which is the two most common. And we don't have a lot of students that do that, but we do have a couple. And the music staff got together and said, it's not a problem for us. As long as we have all three musics offered at the same time, during the same period of the school day, we will work together as a team, as a music team, to make sure that they can take both. We'll kind of share the kids, so to speak, during that one period. So students will remain to be able to take two musics in a 6-period day. But the question comes up, why does music have to be every day? And the reason being is a teacher by contract teaches 5 periods a day and gets 1 hour for a preparation period. That takes up the whole 6th period, which means I have no adults left to do a study hall. So that's the reason if you move musics to every day, it fills that void that is currently in there for students to take a study hall. So that's moving to every day. And I have to tell you, I was a little bit nervous talking to our music teacher saying, hey, if we go to everyday music in 6th grade, what do you think about that? And they didn't even bat an eyelash. She said, oh, that'd be great. That's no problem. So they're not concerned about the everyday piece. So that will work. I will point out, and there's some facts on here, and some of them I've already gone through, but the one that I do want to point out is also Spanish. So our Spanish 6 typically currently is every other day class. And if it goes as it can't, well, back up. It can't go as an every other day class in the same spot that a music is. Because currently they can take Spanish and opposite that a music class because they're both every other day. As soon as music goes to every day, that doesn't work anymore. So the only option we have is for a student that has that Spanish classes, they take it opposite PE. Again, PE is a state requirement. Our students have to take that, but then they could take that Spanish opposite PE. The other nice part about that is it still allows them then to take their music classes as well. So if you're in Spanish and a music, or Spanish and even 2 musics, which typically cannot happen this year, but could moving forward in a 6-period day, they would have that option. The other piece that I had to consider doing a 6-period day is what do we do with students that do not have a music? Because in that elective block on the screen that says the 6th period, and that could be anywhere. I just did it as to simplify the diagram, but that 6th period, what do we offer them? Because remember, I can't do a study hall. I don't have adults to do any more study halls in a 6-period day. So 6th grade would actually have to gain electives. They would have to gain, as we kind of mapped it out, our vision would be is that we give them probably 2 electives they would take, maybe 1 each semester. What those specifically would be, we haven't worked out those details. It's kind of one of those things that I think we have to get a little bit farther down the process before we spend a whole bunch of time kind of creating something that may or may not happen. So I've kind of told our elective teachers this will happen if we have a 6-period day. But I've said, just kind of be thinking about it and we'll address what that looks like down the road. So 6th grade gets an added elective option they currently do not have. Now moving to 7th and 8th grade. The question comes in, without adding FTE, those full-time teachers, how can I add an elective in 6th grade without adding additional FTE or adding more time to another teacher's day? And everything comes at a cost. And here, going from a 7-period day to a 6-period day, our current electives, where we currently have 2 class periods of electives, would go down to 1. So just by the simple math that students have less places to take classes, the enrollment in those elective classes will naturally decrease, or I need less sections or less classes for them to put students in, which then frees people up to teach sixth grade. It keeps those people full-time, as well as offers those sixth graders a couple electives that they currently don't have. The drawback to that is simply that our seventh and eighth graders have one less period to take electives. And the second challenge to that is currently our Amistades program in seventh and eighth grade, unlike currently the Spanish in sixth grade, that's every other day. Currently in seventh and eighth grade, it is every day. That really can't take up a block for similar reasons to having to combine two of the core classes in sixth grade. If you fill in with Amistades, keeping them every day, there is no room for a student to take Amistades and orchestra, or Amistades and band, or choir. The only way to do that is to make sure all electives, including Amistades, goes to every other day. So Amistades shifts to every other day. A student then can also now take their music and Amistades if they choose, or Amistades in an art. Or Amistades at a FACS in seventh grade or a STEM. So the students will still have some choices, but they do have one period less of those choices in a 6-period day. The question did come up with our staff is, what about class size? Would this increase our class size? I don't believe it will. We always look at based on enrollment. Currently, if you get right around 300 students per class, like grade level class, we try having each hour of the day, we have 10 sections. 10 divided by 300 is 30 kids. So we try, that's how we do the math when we actually build the schedule. So this is like scheduling 10,000 foot view. Scheduling is not a perfect science, as much as we want to think it is. So there's a lot of moving. We really try making it a priority to keep our core instruction having similar preps. So for example, our seventh grade science teachers have their preparation period together so they can work together and collaborate. Our sixth grade social studies teachers, same thing. So they can collaborate together. And we try making that a priority with the schedule. What I've told our staff is we'll continue to make that a priority, but the number one priority is the schedule has to work. So if we'll start with that, but we may not end up with that. I think I can pull it off, but until I actually start scheduling, I won't know that. Okay. Questions? I know conceptually it's a little bit of a challenge to kind of visualize, but
Good. Okay, board members, if you have a question, and Ben, you can just unmute yourself if you have a question. Question? Amy?
Thank you.
Turn on your mic there, Amy. There you go.
Now, can you hear me?
yeah.
Okay, so I really appreciate having this explanation of why you're thinking for a 6-period school day, and I have a lot of questions. So I'll start by asking, with a 6-period school day, I assume that all of the course lengths would be longer. Is that right?
Possibly. And the reason for that is our staff is talking about whether we want to do like an advisory, which the middle school, there's some things that have to happen before we can offer that. So we do have some options to add a short period of time, someplace in the school day as an advisory homeroom, something to that effect, which could bring the class period length down to closer to what it is now. Yes, mathematically, if you go from 7 to 6 period, it goes from a 51-minute class to about a 66-minute class roughly. But I believe just based on our conversations so far at the middle school staff, that people are interested in doing something, some way to connect with kids, somewhere to, because they're aware that there won't be a study hall, something that we can do, maybe do our SEL lessons or AVID lessons as well. There's things or options out there, but that has some steps we have to take to get there. But I believe that in the end, something like that will happen. I do envision classes being slightly longer, but not in the 60+ range, more like maybe 57.
So I guess I would be curious as part of the process to know if there was any studies that have been done that show sort of optimal class lengths for middle school age kids. And I know you can't probably answer that off the top of your head, but something to think about with the changing the schedule. And another idea is if there could be, if we did go to 6 periods, sort of like a flex time, the middle school version of flex time, whatever that might be, because the high school seems to have really received that idea very well and are very attached to it. And maybe it would fly in some form in middle school. But that being said, I'm still very concerned about losing electives, especially with the 7th and 8th graders. I understand the 6th graders gain electives, but the 7th and 8th graders will lose 2 electives a year because they're each every other day. So it's
Yes.
1 period.
Yes.
And I think that's something that most students very much look forward to. And also, when you had that many electives, when you did have scheduling issues and someone ended up with the study hall, it was less of an issue. But now if you can't schedule everybody and you end up with an empty slot, can you even have an empty slot? You would have no study halls at all.
Correct.
Okay.
In our current model, that's correct. Yes, in the 6 period day model.
Do you have any sense of what percentage of kids choose to have a study hall in 7th and 8th grade?
Yeah, I actually did the numbers actually the reverse way, but if you look at, we have 105 students in 6th grade that currently do not have a study hall. That's a little deceiving because in 6th grade currently, they only have 1 hour or 1 class period a day to take their electives. So that kind of inflates that a little bit. Where in 7th and 8th grade, they can have their electives all over their schedule. So it's a little bit deceiving with the 105, but in 7th grade, it's 86. And in 8th grade, there's 63. And again, those are students that have 0 study hall. They have electives filled up their entire day. So roughly about 25% of each grade does not take a study hall whatsoever. So 3/4 do have some type of study hall.
And my last question for now, and then I'll pass it over, is there any way of not reducing the periods from 7 to 6, but still being able to reduce the teachers in the 6th grade?
The scenarios that I ran would make that, I'll put it this way. You have to kind of, if you give something up, you have to gain something. So for example, in order for me to reduce our FTE or teachers, that means something has to be eliminated from our schedule or decreased of some sort. And at the middle school, if you remember back to our reductions last year, I took the only small parts that I had, which was foreign language last year in 7th and 8th grade. And that was part of the reduction that I did. I no longer have any bits and pieces. So when we're talking full programs. I can reduce someone to 6/10. I would have a serious concern that I could hire anyone at 6/10 right now. And that's a lot of 6/10 to get. We're not as big as a high school. We don't have as many offerings. So the only way to possibly even remotely think of doing that, and off the top of my head, I couldn't come up with a way that I think would be feasible, is that kids would have multiple study halls. So I'd have a lot of kids having 2 study halls a day. Ethically, I can't be in support of that. I mean, students come to school to take classes and be educated and challenged and stuff, and being in a study hall twice 2 out of the 7 hours, I don't think we'll do that. Because again, if you eliminate something, it's going to leave holes in schedules, and I wouldn't have anything to fill it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Robert?
Well, thanks for providing further detail
Sure.
on this. I guess my question is, in an ideal world, if would this idea of changing to a 6-period schedule be something that you would ever contemplate for academic benefit, or is this something that's just has been forced on us for financial reasons?
No, it's not something that I would necessarily be like, if we weren't in this process, consider. Do I think there's maybe some positives that can come out of that? I'm a real positive person. There's some silver linings, I think, to this. Adding electives to sixth grade would be one of them. I do think it allows our students, I mean, one of the things that I hear from students and parents is a 7-period day and you have every other day classes. A student could have 9 different grades a quarter that they have to do. That is a lot of different classes to manage for a lot of students. Your high flying kids, is like people like to say, don't have a problem with that. But some of those students that really have to work extra hard and then do work real hard, 9 classes is a lot of classes. And so going to a 6-period day really does, in my opinion, will help them stay organized, make it easier to be organized. The length of the day, if you extend that length of the day, teachers can connect with students even more. I'm envisioning them actually working in more work time than maybe we currently have within the school day, so that the teacher's there to help with questions. So I think there are some pieces. I don't want to say it's all negative because I don't believe that. I believe that there are some things that have come out just with our discussion of the staff that's saying, well, yeah, okay, I'm not a fan, but this may be kind of nice to have and may be really good for students.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I can't say I'm overly convinced by argument in a sense. I mean, if 7 versus 6 was such a great, I mean, why, it seems to me, like Robert is saying, I mean, the reason you're doing this is basically financial. I mean, I don't know what the outcomes are. I mean, what benefit does this have to learning? And I'm more about, I mean, I'd love to hear from some parents. I'd love to hear from some kids. And I just, I don't know. I don't know what to think of that. And I just think we're looking to cut things. And I think that education, I think is, people have more options and different things like that. And they come to you because if they want, what do the parents want? What do the kids want out of an education? And if you're not hitting the main points, I mean, you got some other things to cut from. So it's kind of like, we got to get our priority based now, not that you're not. I guess I'm really not persuaded on the argument from 6 to 7. Part of that is maybe out of ignorance, or part of that is just, I want to hear what the customers have to say. My customer, I mean, I'm on a school board, you're an administrator. My customer is the parent, the teacher, I mean, the teachers, the staff, and of course, and parents and kids. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to hear what they have to say. And hopefully we've got 2 Thursday night sessions coming up here, and hopefully we get to hear some good discussions on things like that. And I think that we'll kind of go from there, but I appreciate your time.
Yep. And I do want to clarify, I didn't say that I felt the 6-period day was better than a 7-period day. I didn't say that. I actually said that.
Well, I don't think we'd be
it's not.
doing it because it's purely for financial reasons like you're talking about. But I
It
think
is.
when I'm stepping back a couple steps and I'm saying, well, why are we here? I mean, you've got all kinds of other budgets. What services do we want to provide to students and parents? And then you're getting down to 6 versus 7. Am I really, sold on that? I mean, that's where you get into the whole, category of cuts. And I've been here for a long time. And I think that's a debate that kind of goes on, but what core services do we really want? And again, I'm always comparing self to other school districts and things. What other school districts, who has 6 versus 7 out of the conference? And, do you have any data or any information on who's, and what big benefit is it to education? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
So.
And I would have to do, I mean, I know Amy mentioned that too. I would have to look at research. I haven't done that, but I can tell you that there are school districts do block scheduling, which actually really extend the class periods out.
Yeah, I mean, 50 minutes for 60, put something else in there. And one question I had for sure was, I mean, if you have a study hall, how much, what's really going on? I mean, is there some study being done? I suppose it's basically, based on how disciplined the kid is and whatever else. But I don't know, do kids get a chance to talk then in study hall, or is pretty much sit there and study? Or
No, they typically, and kids, it gives them an opportunity to work in small groups and maybe
Okay.
go to the media center to work on things, but it's not a quiet study hall. You can't talk. They get
Okay.
to work on things as a kind of social.
and I am pro-elective. I think the more electives and things, kids like structure, but I mean, to have, a few electives and some other choice within that, more choice that we can put in with that education, that's a good thing. So, anyway, I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
If I can just add something here. So I want to be really clear. This is about the budget. Right? What the middle school has done, and about all 3 of the areas have done, is we have to make adjustments to our budget to be able to meet the board's 14% goal of our fund balance. This is about budget. And what our administrators are doing is they are using the priorities that were identified by last year's teams, and they are looking to implement them in a way where it still provides the best possible educational offerings that we can have. So this is about the budget. We would not probably be proposing this if we didn't have the budget constraints. But we have to make these budget reductions in order to be able to stabilize our budget for years forward, to be able to get through this period of declining enrollment. And so I just want to be, Greg has done what I have asked him to do in terms of how do we balance implementing the reductions of FTE at the middle school in a way that preserves as much of the programming as possible. So there are choices, and no matter what choice we bring forward, there are pros to it, right? Because even the changes that we're making have some benefit. So I will not try to sugarcoat that this is not difficult, but you asked about what are the educational benefits, Jeff? Logically, what I know from research is if I have more direct instructional time in mathematics, that's good for mathematics, right? It's not great of why we're going to it, but we know when there's more direct instruction, there is a positive outcome from that. We will not try to paint too many silver linings because there isn't. This is because of the budget. And if we didn't propose this, there would need, you cannot, there's the, as Greg said, the ability to nibble around the edges is gone, right? We have done as much as we can with copy paper and making our systems more efficient. Almost all of our energy systems are automated. We continue to try to make sure that our buildings operate efficiently. As I've said a number of times, we wish we didn't have to do this, but you can't, there's just no way in schools to be able to make this substantial of budget adjustments without impacting people. And it's terrible. It is terrible. But if you didn't do this way, you would see it in an entire different offering that might have to be sunset. And then we would appropriately debate that particular. So I just want to be super clear that, well, what I think the middle school has brought forward is an attempt to balance the priorities that have been shared by the prioritization teams in a way that preserves as much of the program as possible. To Amy's point, there is less choice. No way around it, right? You had the ability to have 4 electives in 7th and 8th grade every other day. You'll now have 2. But you still have those electives, right? You have to make additional choices. So I just think it's important for folks that when you have to make those reductions, this plan, what's being brought forward, is one way that we could help achieve the target that we have while also preserving as much of the existing programming as possible. And we'll just continue to apologize. We have done everything we can to not get to this point, but it's where we're at. And we could make everybody feel better and say, oh, we'll just worry about it next year. We can't do that, right? We have to take these actions now because this is what responsible financial management looks like. And so I really appreciate a thought process, and our job is to bring you those suggestions, right? And your job to provide feedback. And if we don't get it right, we'll go back and find another way. But I think we have to be super clear that this is about the budget. It is. And so we would not be proposing this if we didn't have this issue. Now, maybe we would have looked at a different schedule, as Greg has shared. But this is directly responsible for the budget. And we have to make sure that we understand where the budget problem is coming from. It is an upstream issue from chronic underfunding and declining enrollment. So thanks I just wanted to make sure we stepped in and framed that in that way. Thank you for letting me step in.
Thank you. Okay, Corey, you have a question.
Hi, Greg. Appreciate you being here tonight. A question regarding the survey. Did you get the did you receive the number of responses you expected to get? Did you get participation that you thought you might get?
I did. Like I said, I had 68 responses. That's not 68 individual staff members, because what I did is I forced them to only put basically one idea, but they could submit multiple times. But it did. And I have to tell you that the staff was very receptive, as well as when they had it in front of them to have to actually verbalize, here's the direction I'd like to go. There were some people that said, I can't do that. And they gave prioritizations to me and said, can you please prioritize class size or things of that nature? But some people intentionally, because they came and said, I don't have enough knowledge. I don't feel comfortable actually saying stuff, and other people did. So 68 I thought was pretty good. And they were well thought out. They weren't just random thoughts, trying to protect their own jobs. I literally had a teacher that said, cut my job, I can go up here because I'm dual licensed. And there were people that really took it to heart.
So it sounds like everyone who participated, their name was on it, so you had the opportunity to go back and.
I
Because
did,
it
because
wasn't
there was a couple that I
anonymous.
had questions, or more than questions. I went back to a couple that they gave ideas and thoughts, and I wanted to go back to them and say, here's why this can't work. There was a couple suggestions that they didn't understand the domino effect and where that came from. It affected either one side or the other of the middle school, or it was attached to federal funding, that if something went away, then we would lose actually revenue. So it's those types of things that I didn't get into that much detail when I gave it to them intentionally, that I wanted to be able to go back and talk to those people.
You think you might have had higher participation if it was anonymous? But maybe not
I-
as good of answers?
I actually don't think so, because of the fact that I didn't share any results. So no one knows what anyone else said other than myself.
Then last question on your first slide, as you broke down the 6-day period, you allude to Spanish replacing art, and you talked about the Spanish piece. Can you tell us how that would replace art in the schedule, or what you mean by that
Yep.
line?
So it's only in 6th grade for one. And so in the 6th period day, we don't have it up there, but that's fine. It's just that you have that block where as soon as music goes to every day, in order to make sure that, thank you. So on the 6th period day, so when the music goes to every day, there's no place else in the schedule to put Spanish unless you partner it with something. And the only thing in 6th grade specifically to partner with is the FIAD, and that's why that goes there. And we can't keep musics every other day, because that's where we end up. There's like 60 kids that I wouldn't have had a space for, like they don't have a class to take. If we go down that route, and you can't take, like, if you have an elective class, you can't take it some days, but not, the math doesn't work out scheduling wise to do that. So that's the only place in the schedule is go opposite FIAD.
Last question. You had mentioned this is kind of just a framework you don't want to build out because it's obviously takes a lot of effort. When do you think you might have a more thorough idea of how this might look? Because we're voting on this in a month, and I don't know if that's something we could have at least a little more information about how it be built out, or is that more of a summer item that you would work on?
I guess I just asked, what specifics do you want to look at? And then,
Okay.
I'd be happy to go down. So if you're talking about the advisory piece or something like that,
Yeah.
yes, we're having those discussions. I've just kind of slowed the train down, so to speak, because there's some contractual things we have to work with, but our staff is also willing to have those. So if that's the piece you're looking for, absolutely, we can start that. I don't know if I'll have that by April 10th, but
Yeah, a couple items like Amy had mentioned, possibly what happens to the length of the classes, and you mentioned the advisory
Yep.
piece, which sounds good. But just to give us a more complete picture so we know in totality what we might be voting on, because I think it may sway people one way or another if they have a clearer picture. I'm not asking for a total detailed
correct.
outlook, but just something maybe a little more in depth so we can feel confident about the way we go. And I appreciate all the effort, and I definitely appreciate the challenge in front of you. So thank you for your time and the work you put on this.
You're welcome.
Thank
And
you, Corey.
yes, I think I can get to a place before you vote, at least on length of class size, or at least get it narrowed down more, for sure.
Thank you. Okay, Jenny?
Thank you, Principal Jeleno, for the information and for being here tonight. And I especially like your point about that, the kids are coming to school to learn. So you're trying to prioritize and even further down by selecting courses and core classes and making sure that you emphasize time for all of that. But on the other hand, my concern lies with eliminating the study halls, because I think that there's a lot of kids that do receive help, homework help from some of the staff. As I talk to parents and students, that's what I'm getting a lot of feedback about, is how much help they actually get during that time. And it kind of surprised me too, because back in the day when we had a study hall, it was kind of more of a social event. But what I'm hearing a lot of is how much help those kids are getting. And it concerns me because if they're not able to get that homework help at home from parents, whether they're working or they're just not getting the content and they're not able to help the kids, then where do they go? And if they can't stay after school, I know we have amazing after school homework help programs at the middle school. And that's a program I'm really proud of, but for those kids who also cannot utilize that, can't, for whatever reason, cannot stay after school, whether it's transportation or they have duties at home or whatever it is. My concern really lies there in eliminating those study halls. And you had mentioned that it's kind of a give and take when you're looking at these. So if you were to keep study halls, does that mean that you would have to take something else completely away?
In a 6-period day, yes, there's no room. You would have to choose a study hall over an elective class. Again, the problem, I would have to have a classroom teacher because they can only teach 5 days at 5 hours and then have a prep period, which theirs are 6. I would have to have them teach basically 4 content areas and then pay them to do a study hall. That's just the basic math of how that would work.
Okay, thank you.
I will add, though, that in the proposal of doing some type of homeroom or something, or flex or whatever we do, study hall did come up as something that I think our staff would like to at least see at some level of being able to access students. Because you're right, specifically in 7th grade, probably more than the other 2, but 6th grade to a certain extent as well. Our 7th grade teachers do a phenomenal job trading kids with their flex study hall and really giving kids help. So, because we've been doing that where they all have study hall at the same time, which is effective.
Thank you, Jenny. Let me see if Ben has a question and then I'll call it back to you. Ben, do you want to unmute if you have a question or let me know if you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. Can you hear me?
Yep, and we see you.
Okay, excellent. Very good. Well, thanks, Mr. Gelano. I appreciate you taking the time to walk us through that. I know none of this is easy, and thanks, Matt, for clarifying why we're here and having these conversations. I think that's dually important. Obviously any cuts are difficult, even if they're minor, and these aren't necessarily minor cuts in any way, shape, or form. So thank you. Informative presentation. A lot of good questions here from board members. I think the only question I would have is to build off of what Jenny was asking a little bit and say, have you had conversations, or maybe will you have conversations about ways to support students kind of in that model, in a 6-period model, to make sure that they're getting, in school, in class support that might go away if they don't have those study halls. So if we have longer class periods, will there be more time for kind of in classroom work? And I'm just speaking as the parent of a 7th grader who I think benefits right now from having a study hall and hopefully getting his work done during that time sometimes. So just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yes, we have had those conversations and it will continue. I know I have some staff members that are really forward thinkers and they've already thought about their own classroom. Okay, if I go to this, how am I going to, and they've verbalized to me, okay, I'm gonna need to add in more work time in class. And again, the discussions about a homeroom advisory or whatever that may end up looking like or being called is another avenue that we can get students the help that they need.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I should, and I neglected and I apologize, but part of my presentation, there was one piece in there that I really wanted to make sure the board had this information. So I apologize, I didn't say it up front. One of, in my opinion, the largest hurdles or challenges we have in a 6-period day actually is not with what any of you brought up. It has to do with getting students that have special education, ELL, our ADSIS program in math and reading, because if you look at that schedule, there's no place to put those. So they either have to drop electives or a core class, or we have to get creative somehow. So that is another, in my opinion, going to be a significant change or hurdle for us to get over to be able to service those students and give them the supports they need.
Any other comments or questions? Amy?
So for the 7th and 8th grade, if they want to do music, would it be every other day for them?
It is. So 7th and 8th grade remains every other day because in 7th and 8th grade, they kind of have it works in their schedule based on like it does in 6th grade. So they would remain every other day.
Okay,
They have
so
more
they could then
elective
take
options
a
too.
very different elective.
They could.
And they would have the same option if they wanted to combine choir and orchestra? Would they still be
They
able to?
can, because it's every other day, so they could actually go back to back, and that would be their two electives. they
Oh,
would
okay,
have.
they'd have to use it, both of them that way.
Correct.
then.
The only
Okay.
thing is if they have Amistades in a music, they can do Amistades in one music. They just can't do Amistades in two musics. And I don't know of anyone actually that has that, but that would be the one thing that I came up with that they couldn't do.
Back a decade ago, when my daughter was at the middle school,
I was probably there.
I remember the sixth grade teachers bragging about how we had both reading and writing as separate classes because they're separate skills. And I was been thinking about that. And we recently had some statistics sent out by Hope Langston that talked about how our 10th grade reading scores actually are really good on the pre-ACT tests this year. And it made me wonder if there's any way of showing that if there is an advantage to teaching reading separately than writing, and if we're going to lose that in our ACT test scores a few years down the line. So this would be a Hope question for Hope Langston. If she can show whether we have some sort of bump that happens in sixth grade, especially with reading, but maybe with writing as well, that is then maintained through the rest of their time in the district, the students.
I can't comment on the STAR data, but the MCA data, the test changes so much, so it becomes very difficult to see a correlation. The actual scores typically in reading, specifically coming into the middle school, quite often will drop a little bit actually in reading, but that's because remember the test changes when they get there. So it's not really an apples to apple comparison. I'm a logical thinker. I mean, if you're taking away you're taking two classes and moving into one, there could be some curricular things that are going to have to be discussed, and it will put some pressure on our elementary colleagues to say, you know what, if we're doing this, you may have to do more in the writing realm than maybe you've done in the past, because you can't count on them having a full class period of writing when they get to the middle school.
Okay, I can see that. Because it does seem like they're both very important skills. And so
Absolutely.
it is a hard decision to make to combine them even. Then I have a question about, well, I want to second all the study hall stuff that was just talked about. Can I ask you or give you a suggestion on activities fees? Can we switch the topic or should we stay on this?
We should probably stay on this for, make sure that we're done with the questions on this topic.
Okay, I will wait.
Call back on you.
Hmm.
And I haven't, are you also going to do a little presentation on that or no?
Val is going to talk
Oh,
about
Val,
the
you got
activities
that.
fees. Yep.
Okay, good. Any other comments or questions on this topic? Greg, I also want to thank you for all the effort that you and your staff put into putting this proposal together. And like everybody else says, it's incredibly challenging and there's, as has been stated, very little we're just so lean already.
Right.
What I heard is that we're going from lots of choice for electives to less choice, but we're not eliminating those electives. And so
Correct.
that's a silver lining or something positive anyway. And then Ben also referred to the possibility of within class, there may be some in-class help when the study halls go away. I know that teachers are resourceful that way. And so they're not gonna not help students who are struggling.
Correct.
But we had a more ideal situation with the study hall. And so
Absolutely.
we're, again, because of budgets, just moving out of stellar setup to an acceptable setup, not less than. But yeah, that's why it's so difficult because we had something so much better and we're moving to something that's good, but not as good as we've had. I wanted to hear, I didn't understand yet, and I apologize, board members, I didn't understand why Spanish has to reflect or replace art.
Because if you think about when music needs to go to every day, and it has to do that, remember, because we don't have any study halls.
Mhm.
So I need a place for those students to go that maybe don't have Spanish, but only band. They wouldn't have anywhere to go opposite band if band was every other day. So musics have to go every day. So now Spanish has nothing to go opposite it. And the only class in a sixth grade schedule is Phy-Ed and art, and Phy-Ed's a required class.
Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned about Avid and SEL. When would those be done in a 6-day period?
We would have to,
Just take
dropping electives would be one option. We would have to, what I've told families that are, because we're in the application process for Avid now for next year, that we would sit down with the family and go over options. So it will really kind of tailor it to specific needs for the student, depending on what they have. You know, we don't want to drop their band if they've been in band for X number of years or whatever. So we will just work with the family and come up with what's a viable solution.
And then lastly, can you speak some more about the services to EL and to other interventions?
Yep. Absolutely. So currently those services replace an elective. So if you shrink the amount of places that they can go, yep, they could still go opposite elective, but as someone had mentioned, a couple people mentioned, a lot of times that's like a highlight of those students that we're servicing. So we've always really kind of dug in our heels with it. That's a really last resort. So we have to get creative. And one thing we tried this year with our access reading class and our EL classes, we did a push in. So we combined the two classes together because we noticed we had a lot of our EL students also were getting access reading help. So they co-taught, and it satisfied, they received their EL service as well as they're getting support in reading. So I think that's going to be the creativity of really working on things in that manner for the EL piece. Now, special ed, they have a similar challenge in front of them. And that's so dependent on the student's IEP is how many hours are serviced. So that is, it would be, our special ed staff has already been trying to wrap their brain around what could this look like with making sure we get minutes in, but even a couple of them have approached me and said, okay, maybe we have to, instead of we currently do full class periods in reading and full class of the writing, maybe we need to break it into two. Maybe we need to do half the class periods reading and half the class periods writing. So they're also thinking of alternative ways to make sure they can get kids serviced and meet their needs. Because that can't be a discussion, that has to happen. So we just have to get creative and figure out what the best way to do that is.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate you.
Yep, thank you.
So the next part of the discussion we did have in the packet, we wanted to share with you about the alternate options for middle school athletic fees, activity fees, excuse me. So Val, you saw in the packet, you have a variety of different ways that you would be able to offset the expenditures in middle school athletics with increased fees. I do want to emphasize that with any increased fees, there would be community support to ensure that there are enough scholarship dollars available to make sure that no one who wants to, we would not turn anyone away who wants to participate. We have helped fund those kinds of things for years. We would just need to engage the community more. So Val, would you just walk through and I'll bring it up on my computer so people can see it on the screen, the fee structures that we're not seeing it to pick from one. These are some examples of thoughts of what you might be able to do.
Sure. So what I took away from the last meeting was just a lot of discussion around what are some other alternatives and things that we could discuss and look at. So what I ended up doing was pulling the fiscal year 22 participation by every activity. And I used fiscal 22 specifically because we have not completed the 23 school year. So I don't have complete registration for the spring. So I wanted something that was complete to run the data off as a base year. And then by activity, you can see what the fee was in fiscal 22. We did increase that as part of the priority-based budget reduction process last year. So you can see that increase for fiscal 23. And then basically at the bottom of each section, high schools on the top and then middle schools at the bottom, you can see the total revenue that generates. And I want to be clear that this, all of these calculations are making the assumption that we're getting about 87% of the total possible revenue. When I ran the data for fiscal 22 with all of the waivers, free and reduced scholarship items, that is the approximate percentage. It varied by activity, but that was the average. So that is what I used for this calculation. And then I went through and basically just provided some benchmarks just for talking points, so you can see what a 25% increase on the current rates would be. If we looked at middle school only, generating an additional $125,000 so that we didn't have to reduce it, would be a 235% increase. Now, I'm not saying that's what I'm advocating for or recommending, but I wanted to show the breadth of the possibilities for discussion. I also included on the top what the high school increases could look like. And if we we're going to look at activities 7-12 cohesively, and you wanted to look at $125,000 increase across the whole to keep middle school activities, we'd be looking at roughly a 50% increase in both middle school and high school fees. And that would generate roughly $125,000. Again, knowing that this is based on the assumption of all of the same registration, the same level of scholarship needs. There's lots of assumptions in the data, but it gives you a starting point for the conversation if you're interested in looking at a different outcome. So I will take any specific questions that board members might have on that.
Thank you, Val. Any questions or comments? Amy.
I had a thought about a different approach to, and that would be based on where there would be sort of I'm thinking middle school in particular, but there would be a fee for participating in activity. But then for those activities where there's transportation involved to other locations, which tends to be a very expensive piece of it, that there could be an additional transportation charge. So basically the people who, the students in those activities are responsible for covering the transportation, because that seems more fair to me than evenly spreading it out among all, like the people coming to the fitness center who are just working out and not traveling anywhere. Why should they subsidize, $100 or more someone else having to travel every weekend to get to a tournament? Just wanted to suggest that.
Yep, I can certainly look at what that would, what a model like that could be. I would just say for every activity, there's going to be some complicating factor. So the fitness center is actually a perfect example because we just spent about $30,000 purchasing new equipment there. So their equipment is very expensive to maintain and replace. And that varies by activity. So there's a lot of different components that we need to consider when we're setting a fee, and what are the primary ones that we want to charge that fee on. So just food for that, but I can certainly look at a model in that way.
Thank you.
Hi, Claudia. I've got a question if you don't mind. Okay, sure. Sounds good. Thanks, Val. That was informative. So just to go back and talk about, if we look at activities a little more holistically from 7 to 12, you said we'd be at about a 50% fee increase to get to the 125,000. Is that right?
Yep. So 50% for high school would generate about 106,000, and then another 26,000 for middle school. So it'd be a little bit over, so we could do something kind of in the middle, but that was kind of the rough estimate.
Sure. And is that, so if we were to do that, we'd be maintaining fees consistently or proportionally with where they are now. Is that right? Between the two? Yeah. I think, as I think about it, I think that's we've been focused, I think, in conversation on middle school activities overall, but the more the conversation goes on, I think we recognize the interdependentness of middle school feeding into some of the high school programs, and some just natural overlap. There are some sports that just the middle schoolers go over and participate in the JV or varsity sport. So for me, I think I'm more interested in that option when we look at fee increases, being able to spread it across the full secondary program, as opposed to kind of looking solely at middle school activities alone to make up that revenue.
Thank you. Corey?
Yeah, I would start by saying I agree with Ben. I think that's a little more palatable to spread it across 6 through 12 at 50%. And I'm sorry if you said this, Val, when you're starting, I was kind of digging into the numbers. Are these numbers like the FY 23 numbers and then multiplied out? The new numbers, are those contingent on 100% of the students paying 100%, or does this factor in any of the scholarship students or reduced fees?
The calculation assumes for every model that I showed that we get 87% of the possible revenue
87%. Okay, thank you.
And that's the tie back to what it is this year
for fiscal 22.
for fiscal 22.
Good. Robert?
I'm also in agreement. I like Ben and Corey's idea of thinking about this more holistically, and thanks for presenting these models of showing, what it would be for these percentage increases for each of these activities at both the high school and middle school. My question, just clarifying on 22B, the option there of increasing middle school activity fees 100%, which would raise $53,000 in revenue. It reads in the explanation that $100,000, a reduction of $100,000 would still be recommended. What am I not seeing there? Because it comes to 150 in that $50,000 increase and $100,000 reduction.
Let me see. I did this like a week ago, so now I'm trying to remember. So I think the recommendation. No, I think I probably just did the math wrong. Now that I'm reading it again. Because if it generated an additional 53,000, then you would only have to cut 72. Yeah. So just a typo on my end. And that was not like a recommendation, like just picking something in the middle as an example of what that would mean should the board be interested in that direction.
Hey, Jeff?
Yeah, just to kind of add a little bit to what Ben was saying and maybe Corey. I've been working with activities for a long time, and I think to talk about bang for the buck, there's nothing better than sports and activities. It's typically, what are we at, 63 million is the budget or something right around there. So, sports and activities are about 2%. Now I believe it's 3%. And I think that we're talking about this little segment. And if my number is right, it's the middle school is like 0.03% of the overall budget. So I think that if the number is 125K and raising fees, I'd have to look at that. I'm not necessarily agreeing with all the numbers on that. But if that got us halfway home, that's somewhere to get. And I think that you need to do with the total picture of 6 through 12 or whatever that is, sports has got to be all kind of together, and you're figuring out what you're doing and not just leaving middle school sports out on an island. Not to say that we don't look at all the options on the table, but I think that that's definitely something we need to talk about, is making it more, sports and activities together for the whole district.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I just had one more question, sorry. But maybe you could just, Matt or Val, describe briefly kind of what the current scholarship opportunities look like, or how that's funded. Just for those that may not be as in the know.
Sure. So with any fee that we set, the current process is that families that qualify for reduced price meals pay 40% of that total. And if they qualify for free meals, they pay 20% of the total. There is also, and this is my understanding, I don't work with it every day, so it's to the best of my knowledge at this particular minute, but I do believe there's also a process for students who feel that they can't even pay any part of the fee. There's an opportunity for them to ask for a full waiver. And to my knowledge, those are not denied as long as there's a need that the student comes forward with or the family comes forward with.
Thank you.
Yep. Want to make some comments, Dr. Hammond?
No, I think that we heard you and we've heard the people in the community about this particular item, and it is one of the very few areas in the budget where you do have the ability to raise a fee to be able to offset for the appropriate concerns about equity and making sure that everyone who wants to participate can. I can assure you that regardless of the increase of the fee, we would help find a way to make that happen, whether it be by approaching other community groups. We have an active angel fund. If people want it, they can actually donate to the angel fund right on our website of those kinds of things that we can do to help support students if we do increase fees. We do want to make sure we don't decrease access. We want to make sure that if we raise the fees, that people who need that financial support have it. We are confident that that can happen in this case. But we just want to share that is a challenge, right? When you raise fees, is to make sure that it is accessible for everyone. So this is one of the few areas in the budget where you do have the ability to raise the revenue on our own to be able to get there. So I appreciate Val giving a mock-up of what it would look like. I appreciate board members' feedback about looking at these fees more holistically in grades 6 through 12. I think that that's, every process, as difficult as it can be, there's new learning that comes out of it that makes us more efficient and better. And this might be one of those examples. The final the next item that we had for just related to the budget topic tonight is some more detail about the budget appropriation that was approved last year, the budget reduction that was approved last year around transportation. And so we will tell you, I'm not going to bury the lead. Val is going to share the work. We do have John Benjamin and Lori Benjamin Miller from Northfield Lions Benjamin Bus here if there are some specific detailed questions that they can assist us with. The transportation target is going to be very difficult to reach, right? And last year, part of our budget process, we really did feel that we would be able to hit that transportation target. You'll be happy to know that, as Val is going to describe, our transportation system is incredibly efficient. So there are very little ways that we can make substantial increases without doing some serious things like increasing ride times dramatically or other service reductions, things that we know that are bad, right? Things that we would prefer not to do, and have additional impact in other ways, unintentional consequences. So Val is going to share what we've learned. There's been months of studying what are the potential ways to, with Benjamin Bus, months of studying how could we create a even more efficient system. And Val is going to share some of the concepts that we have.
One more comment on what Matt said. As far as sports and activities, if for whatever reason, things are going up, you don't have the money, you can't participate. We don't want to turn anybody down. We want everybody, find a sport, find an activity that you kids can get involved in, and we don't want money to be necessarily an issue. So follow up on that. We'll figure out how to make it work.
I think Dr. Hellman also said that.
Well, that's what
Nobody's
I'm-
going to get turned away.
Yeah, I'm echoing that point. Yeah, exactly.
And so this report was in the table file.
So I just put together a summary of sort of the background, the initial proposal that was identified. And so just so everyone's on the same page, our current transportation system has 23 morning routes and 22 afternoon routes that transport more than 2,000 students every day over 178 square miles in 3 counties. It is very efficient. And I actually forgot I was going to include a picture of the district map so you could see just how wide of an area it is that we actually transport and why some of the things I'm going to talk through are challenging to work through. So I wanted to provide all of the things that we discussed just as a, to be transparent about that we did truly try to leave no stone unturned. So we did look at options of only transporting students that live 2 miles or more from their school building. That is what is required under statute. We obviously currently transport, we do 0.75 miles for elementary and at a mile for secondary. So we are doing more than what is statutorily required right now. And that change would result in about 16 morning and afternoon routes, and approximately 1,000 students would lose access to transportation. We looked at changing the boundary from 1.0 to 1.5 for secondary and from 0.75 to 1.0 for elementary. That would look at about 21 morning and afternoon routes and 450 students losing access to transportation. We looked at thinking creatively about boundary changes that would end building times, actually building start and end times that would facilitate a different methodology of transportation than we're currently doing that would be more efficient and streamlined. I would say this idea was pretty robust and certainly not something that we could implement in the fall because it would require significant communication and notification of families. That option had 19 morning routes and afternoon routes. And again, was very similar with about 450 students losing access to transportation. We also looked at routing the rural Bridgewater attendance area on a single tier and having basically like a 15-minute earlier bell schedule. And that would allow Benjamin Bus to help facilitate the transportation to NCEC more effectively. There's a pretty tight turnaround window from the elementary start time to NCEC's start time. And some policy practice items that we considered is just increasing the acceptable arrival and departure windows at each building to maximize the use of vehicles. Right now, there's a pretty tight 10 to maybe 15-minute window where students can be dropped off. And again, that's a supervision requirement on the district's part to ensure those students are supervised. And so that's a conversation that we had. We talked about requiring an annual registration for transportation. Right now, if you are enrolled in transportation, that rolls over to the next year. And so there's students that are not riding regularly or not riding at all that just never filled out the form, but they were rolled over from year to year. So that could increase the efficiency of routing. This would likely have to utilize some sort of bus pass to make sure that you are in the system and to know who was riding regularly. We did look at what the acceptable length for riding time for rural students would be. Right now, we don't recommend more than an hour, and Benjamin Bus is great about really being true to that. Because of the 178 square miles, it's pretty difficult to manage less routes and not increase that rural ride time. And that is not something that we're going to recommend at this point. We did talk about leaving boundaries in place currently and then implementing an annual charge for anybody that lives less than 2 miles, but still providing that transportation. And there's discussion about a surcharge for activity travel. We pay about $250,000 a year for the activity transportation component. So that was about 8 months of conversations summed up in a few paragraphs, but our actual recommendations at this point are not to change any of the transportation boundaries. The number of students and families impacted or the potential impact to ride times was not something that we could support or recommend at this time. So that means that the recommendations we do have, they will hopefully gain efficiencies, will not meet the target of the $350,000. So the first recommendation is to move to an opt-in transportation system. As I described, it is now an opt-out system. And so having the opt-in requiring that form for transportation will allow for maximum efficiency. And again, just having some kind of bus pass protocol will allow for easy identification to make sure that the students that are riding should be riding. We're recommending consideration of a fee for service transportation model. We are allowed to do this by statute since we are transporting within or inside the statutory requirement. Currently, like I've said, it's 0.75 miles for elementary and 1.0 secondary. And our goal is ultimately to provide safe and reliable transportation. Getting kids to school safely is important, and limiting that access is not something that we want to do, and we want them to be here. So one model would have the fee, and below is the chart with an estimated calculation. Again, this is just for discussion purposes. I'm not making a formal recommendation about the fee level. It would be about 1,000 or just I have 1,100 students total that are currently transported less than 2 miles or living less than 2 miles from school. And so I put a range of 250, 300, and 350 as a initial thought process. Again, I picked 75%, knowing that this recommendation would actually not have a fee at all for any students that are qualifying for free or reduced meals. And so 75% is a guess on my part based on our current free and reduced population percentage, but again, that number could vary. And so you can see at a $250 annual fee, that would be about $204,000. I would also recommend a family cap, which is not calculated into this because I was not sure how exactly to calculate that. That would require a little more time than I had to pull this together, but something that we can look at in the future if the board is interested in moving in this direction. I did also do a little bit of analysis. There are several other districts that do have a fee-based model for transportation. The fees range from $100 a year to $475 a year, depending on the district. And there's a few different models that I came across, but it is not brand new territory is my point there. The third recommendation is collaborating with the city to help see if there's a way to facilitate constructing a street or a path to connect Aspen Street to Southbridge Drive. Right now, the entire area on the southeast side of town is transportable to the middle school because their walk path actually goes up to Jefferson. And so connecting it on the south side would allow a more direct route. We have a safe way to cross with the crossing guards and the path there, but that would alleviate a pretty large area that currently requires transportation per the policy. Again, like I mentioned, allowing flexibility and bus arrival and departure times does allow for more efficient use of vehicles. This would have to be done with each building to make sure that the supervision and that is coordinated well. And so that is something we can work with each building on. And then again, reviewing activities, transportation. Again, to Amy's point with the fee discussion, there are significant variations with the transportation depending on the activity. I also would like to dive in a little bit deeper with the activities department about what drives that expenditure. Is it only competition? Are they going to things that are voluntary for practice or meets or extra things that we could look at having the student activity or the booster club help support, where do we have a district protocol about what the activity fee and the department pays for versus kind of the extra, if that makes sense. Those were our formal recommendations, again, for discussion. And I will take any questions. Again, John and Larry are both here if there's specific questions that I can't answer, but that is the current status of where we're at with that.
Thank you, Val. Any questions or comments? Okay, Corey?
One question, I believe our last discussion, we talked about for major thoroughfares like Highway 3, even if students fall within 2 miles, they still need to be transported because it's not a safe crossing. That's correct.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that's all reflected here in your numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Val. Just a quick question from me. When we look at your recommendations, are those considered additive, or help me understand? You kind of got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are those? Is there a price tag associated with each one of those, or is that to get to the 350?
I would say the fee for service for transportation is really the only one that's going to bring additional revenue. The opt-in for transportation, the goal would be that we would have less students basically being routed, so the routes could be more efficient. And then in theory, that would result in less routes being required. That's not something that I can say with any certainty that will actually happen, but that would be the goal right now. If we've got 180 kids on a route, we're probably going to suggest another route or shuffle that around. But making sure that we're routing for kids who are riding regularly would be the goal there. So I would say in terms of costs, there's implementing a bus pass, there's likely some sort of cost associated with that, but I wouldn't anticipate that to be significant. And I would anticipate being able to do that internally in collaboration with Benjamin Bus. The other ones, again, the number 4 with the arrival, that could result in additional supervision time. We'd have to work with each building to really understand their supervisory experience in the morning and after school, and just make sure that we're not adding things that were unanticipated. So I don't know if that really answered the question, Ben, but the fee is really a revenue generator. The rest are hopeful that they would save costs in the long run, but not necessarily a short-term solution to get to 350, if that makes sense.
Sure. So other than number 2, we don't really have a good sense of kind of what the fiscal impact of those other ones would be.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Corey, did you have a question? Okay, Amy?
So back when my daughter took the bus, I remember that we had to fill out a form and opt in, and she got a bus pass. Has that changed in the last few years? Or, because I'm just wondering if it did change, why it changed, and if they found that they were having the same number of people riding the bus as they expected anyways, and that's why they dropped it. So why would we go back and do that again if they found it was unnecessary?
So we strongly encourage them to fill out the form, to be signed up for transportation or new transportation. You absolutely have to fill out the form, otherwise they don't know you're coming. But I would say that there are students who ride every single year, or, I went to middle school and now I'm in an activity, so I don't need it after school, but I never notified Benjamin Bus that I don't need transportation after school. But they don't take those students off until they're notified, because if they do show up, we want to have a plan for them, right? So there is a form. We strongly recommend everyone to fill it out every year, but that's not a perfect science. And so this model would require that, and you would not have transportation until you fill out the form. So it's just tightening that up, if that makes sense. It's an existing process that I would say is a little looser than it could be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just a good parent who did it every year, and so I assumed everybody else was doing that. I also wonder if we end up with more students driving to the high school because of the fee, would we have enough parking spaces for them? How does our parking?
I would say we don't have enough parking spots as it is. There's a fee to park in the lots next to the building, and there's a free lot. I know students park in a variety of places around the campus as well. So that, I mean, in theory, as the enrollment's declining, that would hopefully be less of an issue where it could balance out, but that would be certainly something to consider in the conversation.
Thank you.
And I think if I can just add something, I think that's an interesting question, whether or not this would have a larger impact on high school. My perception would be if I'm going to drive to the high school, I'm driving to the high school already now. So we already have quite a few people who are driving to the high school. It is part of our the vehicle culture that we have across the country. So I think it's a fair point to say, would more people purchase a car, for their students to be able to drive to school? I'm not sure, based upon my knowledge of how that has worked in the past, if the high school change would dramatically increase the students who are already driving to school or not. If you think about it, if I'm not interested in purchasing a vehicle, even a $250 fee is far less than, getting a vehicle and getting insurance. So I think it's a good intellectual exercise. I'm not sure how many more students would drive than are now. Clearly, though, at other buildings, something we have to really be clear about. Yes, there will be, I can assure you, there will be other buildings where there will be more traffic, where people will drive their children to school. I think that that's more at the elementary level and the middle school level, where you will see additional families drive their students rather than pay a fee. We don't know that for sure, but I think that the reasonable person says that's highly likely.
Any other questions or comments? Amy?
That makes me think of parents who drop off their kids at school before going to work, which means we might need to have more supervisors at the school because there are more kids waiting around for school to start. So that could be another effect as well.
We are trying to analyze all of the unintended consequences, right, of these kinds of moves when it is a chess game, right? When you make one move, there's another move that is a result of that. And so we are trying to look, as you heard from a number of presentations tonight, trying to consider what are those secondary impacts. So while something might actually save dollars in the budget, it may also increase pieces elsewhere. And so some of those things are absorbed by the people who are already working here. That's the cost as well, right? In terms of just, it's not a fiscal cost, but it's a cost to the employee and how much more we are all doing. And then there are some other things that do cost more money if we have to increase supervision, et cetera. So the question is, when you balance all of those things out, how do we get to that budgetary number that we need?
Thank you. Okay, ready to move on then. Oh, Corey, I'm sorry. Robert, go ahead.
I'm wondering if the possibility of moving to a fee-based model for those under 2 mile students, would there at all be an opportunity to then say elementary students under 0.75 miles, half mile to 0.75 miles, if they could be moved into be offered a fee-based option, or would our subsidy of that end up offsetting any benefits to the budget from that?
That is an excellent question. Certainly something we can look at. I don't have the student impact because that's not what we were looking at, because that's not what we currently transport. So that would be an add, but I can say that the in-town students is not what generates the cost for transportation. It's the number of rural routes we have to make sure kids have a decent ride time to get to and from school. Just with the mileage that's required to cover. So that's certainly something we could look at. I don't have data off the top of my head for that one.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much, Val, for that piece of it. Was there another piece?
I just have one more piece that I want to reference again, highlighting that we have brought to you tonight in the table file, the specific course areas in the high school where the 3.1 FTE would be reduced. And I just want to make sure I review those again. So you're looking at a 1.0 reduction in mathematics, a 1.0 reduction in social studies, 0.4 in French, 0.2 in English. The 0.2 in music, I want to be really clear, our orchestra teacher is retiring. We would post that position at a 0.8. The orchestra courses would remain exactly the same. What would we not offer is the music theory class that only 13 students have registered for. And so just to be super clear on that, 0.2 in physical education and 0.1 in credit recovery. As I said, I think that as we look at the data around this, in many circumstances, the class sizes are I think overall manageable. I'll give you some examples in mathematics. Most courses within the mathematics department, even with this reduction, would range between 21 and 30. There's a couple of the initial analyses that are significantly over that and some that are significantly under that. So some balancing of that would happen. This is about as far as you can go before you start doing individual student registrations, right? This is the large group data. It's the anecdote or the aggregate data, excuse me, at the top level. And so in that case, it is something that is important for people to see. In social studies, again, fairly similar, reasonable or manageable course sizes. I want to be clear too, no AP courses would be reduced in this model. But those two core areas of math and social studies, there would be some increased course sizes in social studies more so, but it will really depend on the course. And so depends on the size of the grade level, et cetera. And then in addition, as we've said, it's especially for electives, it's a registration-based system. So the reduction of 0.4 in French reflects less registrations, similar things with English and music and et cetera. So we want people to know specifically what those courses that would be reduced. Again, at the high school, no departments, are eliminated. You're just seeing some less offerings in those. Actually, in mathematics and social studies, it isn't less offerings. It's just a different way that they would be staffing that. So now, a month ahead of time, you have what those potential course reductions at the high school would be. And I just wanted to point them out in the packet.
Okay. Amy, question?
So with the French reduction, would that eliminate all French?
It would not.
Okay, just wanted to confirm that.
Any other questions? All right, then we will move on to item B, and Val is presenting the proposed 23-24 debt service fund. We'll be asked to adopt the budget at the May 22nd board meeting.
All right, I will walk through the debt service budget for 23-24. So as a reminder, the debt service budget is a restricted fund of the district that is solely responsible for paying our debt service obligations. So we are required by statute to pay or to levy 105% of any debt principal and interest payments that we are required to make. Just like when you have a mortgage or a car loan, you get a schedule and you know how much you're going to pay each month. I have schedules that show how much we're required to pay each year, and that's what's included on our levy. There is some state aid that helps offset some of these expenditures. We do get an LTFM aid, the A credit, which we've talked a lot about with this and the impact it's had in our district. And there's a few other state credits that come along with that as part of the levy. We do have an offsetting reduction in revenue in the general fund for our operating capital and LTFM. And those were the bonds, specifically the most recent we did was for the middle school bond. We did an LTFM bond, so we are paying for the payments through debt service, but there's an offsetting reduction in our revenue in the general fund. So it's tax neutral for our taxpayers, but it allows us to get that project done using that revenue source out of the general fund. And then the other financing sources is if we are doing a refunding bond, excuse me, any capitalized interest, I would say that happens every couple of years. And so that's not a consistent thing that you'll see in the history on the data on the next slides. Expenditures are super straightforward. It is our principal and interest payments. There are some service fees for, finance the debt and making payments and that sort of thing. And then again, the other financing uses is just that offset for when we're refunding bonds in this fund. So you can see the total revenue. This is probably one of our most consistent funds. And so it's actually pretty nice to present on because it's very straightforward and consistent, and there's not a lot of dramatic changes that need explanation. So the local property tax, again, is that 105%. As a reminder, I've often been asked, what happens to the 5%? Does it just build up over time? And the state actually has a calculation where they call it the debt excess calculation. And so once our fund balance in this particular fund builds to a certain level, they look at it over a 3-year period and what our upcoming debt requirements are, then they will basically reduce that levy so that the taxpayers don't pay as much in the coming year. So that happens periodically. And there's a small amount of that included on this particular levy. Again, interest on investments. We have a cash pool model with our fund accounting. And so there's a small amount of interest that gets allocated. The state of Minnesota is the credits that I talked about. So $835,890 is anticipated for the coming year. Again, that's the LTFM aid and the aid credit and the other state credits. There are no other sources planned at this time. Again, the 2021 other sources is a refunding bond we did in that fiscal year. So about 6.3 million is what we're anticipating for the revenue budget for 23-24. In terms of expenditures, again, the principal and interest, so just over $5 million in principal and interest payments that we're looking at. And then the debt service fees at $7,000. That has ranged from year to year, but it's roughly in the $5,000 to $7,000. In years where we do a bond refunding, you can see obviously that number jumps up because there are fees for the rating call and for others to help us with that process. But we are not anticipating any of those for the coming year at this time. So we're anticipating expenditures of about 5.9 million. And then this is what the summary looks like with the fund balance included. This fund balance ranges, I would say, on average between $1.5 million to $2.5 million. That's a pretty normal range. Once we get up towards $2.5 million, you'll start to see that excess calculation kick in to be a little bit larger amount, but this is a very normal range for this fund. So 6.3 million of revenue, 5.9 of expenditures. So we're looking to grow that fund balance just a little bit to just over $2 million at the end of next year. This is our current principal and interest schedule for the next school year. So we have 5 outstanding bonds. You can see kind of what they were for. Several of them are refunded. Actually, we only have 1 refunding left. We've paid the rest of those off. So the 2021 is our last refunding. Otherwise, they were for the Bridgewater roof, the middle school roof, and then obviously our building projects from the 2018 bond election that was passed. So that is where the $5.9 million comes from. And then this is what our total debt looks like for those 5 issues through 2042. So we have about $61 million outstanding. And you can see the breakout. Again, we have the advantage when we do issue debt to make sure that we try to have the principal and interest payments as consistent in the total from year to year, because that provides consistency for our taxpayers. So we are levying that amount rather than having wild fluctuations. It provides predictability for our taxpayers. And that's it. It's pretty straightforward, but I would gladly answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Val. Appreciate you. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
Okay, item C is the Prairie Creek Charter School site visit presented by Dr. Hillman.
Yes, so as you know, each year when I do the annual site visit for our charter schools, I'll provide a brief report after the visit. Just as a reminder, we are only one of 2 traditional public schools left in the state who go through the rigorous process to be certified, if you will, by the Department of Education to authorize charter schools. So I conducted the site visit on March 6th at Prairie Creek, and it was a joyful experience. Prairie Creek is a wonderful learning institution like our elementaries as well. You can't help but not love being in elementary school most days, right? And so Prairie Creek, of course, is a progressive public charter school, has a wonderful experience. And so I'm going to highlight 3 things that I think were important from the report. The first of which is Prairie Creek has an advantage in their budget planning because they have a limit of the number of students that they are going to have, approximately 140, give or take. So their planning is different. They do a budget target where they are looking at making sure that they have 25% fund balance as projected 3 years into the future. That's a higher fund balance goal because remember, the fewer the number of students, if you did, for whatever reason, one year lose 5 students, that's a substantial issue on your budget. So they have a very proactive, because they have to be out of necessity, a 25% fund balance goal projected 3 years out. This year, at the end of the 21-20 school year, they did hit the 39% mark. So they have about 832,000 in the bank. But they have also deficit spent for 2 years. And as they are looking ahead, they are having to consider some alterations to their program as well in the next couple of years to make sure they're in alignment with their fund balance goal. So just I think that that's important for people to see that they are looking out 3 years. We are trying to look out every year because that's just the way our system works. Theirs works a little bit differently. The second part that I want to share is that working and talking with the staff, they are also really using the theme of reset this year, even though they're talking about it a little bit differently. A small public charter school like Prairie Creek relies so much on their school culture that includes their students, their staff, and their parents. So a major part of Prairie Creek's operation was parent volunteers and parent involvement in the school. And during the pandemic, that obviously was disrupted. So when we talked with all segments of the population, there was a piece about needing to reteach people about some of the things of what it means to be a Prairie Creek student, about what it means to be a Prairie Creek parent in terms of just involvement and the expectations that they all agree to effectively run the school. So by way of example, just how do we treat a project night? When a project night is there, we want people to give everyone feedback about their project, right? Rather than maybe just my student. That's not intuitive, for individuals if they haven't been taught that before. So all segments, parents, staff, their board are really working hard about resetting and then also leveraging what are the things that they might have had as traditions that are also making sense to change. So I thought it was a really interesting that it's just not our school district. It's obviously every different kind of school that is resetting what is regular after the pandemic. And the final piece I want to share is the school does plan to shift. By law, charter schools cannot own their own building, right? So they have to lease their facility. Prairie Creek is planning to shift to what is called an affiliated building corporation. And so they have a longtime nonprofit facility owner. It actually goes back to the days of when Prairie Creek was a private school decades ago. They are looking to do what many charter schools have shifted to, this affiliated building corporation. I will tell you that I'm not deeply steeped in that particular topic, but what Prairie Creek finance director and what Simon, the director there, they talk about is that this is really a place where you can provide greater transparency about the lease. And it would give the Prairie Creek Board greater opportunity to be involved with the buildings and grounds management. Right now, they lease and, there's an owner and there's some different interactions to get things done in an affiliated building corporation. My understanding is that would give the board, the Prairie Creek Board, more input and authority over the buildings and grounds management. So I know that the school has been looking at that for some time. Ben Miller, a member of our school board now, was a chair of Prairie Creek School Board when they started to talk about this. So Ben, I hope you might just talk about the length of time that they have discussed the affiliated building corporation. Those are the three main points I want to bring forward from the Prairie Creek site visit.
Very good. Ben, do you want to make a comment?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that great summary, Matt. And I'm sure it was a wonderful visit out there. I'm glad to hear they're continue to do well with their fund balance. That's something we strove for when I was on the board, and even went so far as to start to look at kind of a 5-year projection for their budget overall. But it's good to hear too that they're working on the affiliated building company issue. And I think that's one of the things that does is it makes the kind of deliberations of that legal entity public, whereas right now, if it's not an ABC, it's not. So that it just gives a little more financial transparency and allows the board, as you said, to have a little more direct control over, or direct input, I should say. They don't have control. I want to make that clear, but a little more input into priorities in terms of building maintenance and things like that. So encouraging to hear that, and thank you for the update.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you for that report, Dr. Hellman. And now we're on to item D, district handbooks and approval process. And you'd like to present an updated process.
Yeah, so this is the beginning of this discussion, and really this item also ties in with the one action item that we have this evening. So each year, the board adopts, we call them superintendent goals. Now we call them superintendent areas of focus. We still write them in a SMART goal-like way, but many of the things are a task to be accomplished during the year. The board helping me identify, outside of the regular job responsibilities, what are some areas you'd like me to focus on during the school year. So we have had feedback over time about the desire to reimagine how our building handbooks are presented. So I had set a goal of having that reimagination presented to the board by March 30th. And just frankly, we are not able to get there by March 30th. We believe we can get there by June 30th. So I'm going to ask you to formally extend that time frame as part of my areas of focus later in the meeting. We have 13 different handbooks. Anita Ozzie is the central planner of all those handbooks to try to make sure that there is consistency ranging from things like consistency in font and font size. So we look like we're organized from building to building, to making sure that we are putting in the updated parts in each handbook. So for example, in many handbooks, we have a reference to the bullying policy. If we update something with a bullying policy, that needs to be updated in each handbook. That's just one example. So we need to make sure that every area that we have said in the handbook, there's something, if that part of the district gets updated, some kind of policy, some kind of operational piece, that has to be updated and it's duplicative across all those handbooks. We have really worked with the policy committee over the last several years to review the handbooks. They are in far better shape than they are now, they're far better shape now than they were a few years ago. It takes the board and the policy committee a tremendous amount of brain power and headspace to be able to go every year through 13 handbooks. Anita was charged with doing some research. We are one of the very few, I'm not going to say the only, but we're one of the very few school districts that has the board formally approve each of these building level handbooks each year. We have continued to, even though we have shifted to where our handbooks are online, we have continued to think about them with a print mindset. And so as we try to reimagine these handbooks, we are looking at how we can be more efficient, reduce the amount of duplication that we have to have more vertical alignment. And so if we are talking about cell phones, for example, people shouldn't have to go to 3 different places to see what are the expectations for cell phones. It could be one place explaining what's the expectation at the elementary level, what's the expectation at the middle level, what's the expectation at the high school level. In some ways, similar to how we have the student citizenship handbook, which we will always ask you to approve because the student citizenship handbook is our discipline policy. So you can see that vertical articulation of how we handle discipline, take that mindset and try to apply it, to these general handbooks. In addition, if you really think about the handbooks and you look through them, I ask you to think about it in this way. There's really three things that are in the handbooks. One is informational, a list of telephone numbers, which again is duplicative because those are all on the website. So if you're reimagining it, you're pointing people to our staff directory, which already has all of that information, right? So that would be an example of how we're duplicating that across 13 different handbooks, but we could use one central source so that when it's updated and people have the access to the latest information. So informational. The second part is basically reiterating or pointing to board policy. So I'm going to use the bullying policy as an example. Again, we highlight the bullying policy in almost every or all handbooks. Again, that's policy that the board has already approved. So we've had you approve the policy, then we have you approve the handbooks a second time. It appears to be redundant in nature. The third thing that is typically outlined in handbooks are administrative operations. So for example, if I am in elementary school, it might be, please enter at door number 4 when you come into the school day. That is an administrative operational component of which the board has delegated to the building administrators. So when we really think about where do we want the board to spend its time, and we've looked at how much time we've spent on handbooks at the board table over the last few years, my thought process is that we've done a lot of heavy lifting on what the handbook content should look like in the last few years. We're now ready to start moving to how do we change how we present that to people. So it's more of a user guide, if you will, rather than something, because people don't read the handbook until they need it, right? And so if we can have a more centralized, mobile-friendly, modern technology approach to it, it should be something that should be more useful to parents. And then it would also provide the board greater opportunity during the spring when we have typically asked you to review those handbooks and you are diligent, you review them, you look through them, it would create more board time for other things other than items that frankly you have already approved. So I am not asking it to all I am doing is opening this discussion tonight. This is an important topic, right? Because it is something we have had the board take action on in the past. I think that was reasonable, but I think we've now approached a time, and as we think about how we're going to shift how we present that information, the redundancy in asking you to approve those is apparent to me. And I think it is something that we could do as an efficiency and a better service to families. So that is just the concept. I just wanted to bring it forward to you. I will ask you to formally weigh in on it at a meeting in the future, but I'd be happy to take any questions or dialogue that people have right now. If you think this is a good idea and keep going with it, well, we are going to create something about how we reimagine the handbooks. Whether you have to approve that each year or not is another part of the equation.
Are there any questions or comments? Okay, Amy.
I just want to say I love the idea of making it more modern and approachable. And so we don't have 1990s handbooks anymore and then get up to the 1920s. I love the idea of being able to make them multimedia handbooks. There could be videos involved. There could be messages from other students explaining things. There could be all sorts of ways to help and our students understand our culture and in a more engaging way. So that's all great. I would also, while I don't feel the need to have to approve every single handbook, I would like to be in the loop somehow to know that they're out there and have the ability to go, check them out and comment on them if I feel the need to, but just to not be out of the loop entirely, but just to always be told the new ones are online, go check them out. Let us know what you think.
Good. Anyone else? Yeah, I'd also be interested in a greater discussion on our involvement with the handbooks. And the reason that there's only one example that I can think of is that my memory is that the different handbooks had a different interpretation on our dress code, so that we spoke, as a board, we have that investment and that that place that we can speak to the policy on dress code, but then in the handbooks individually, it seemed to be interpreted differently. So that's the only example that I can think of, but that's an important example in my opinion.
And so the concept would be making sure that, ensuring that what is put out as the operational component of the policy meets the spirit of what the policy is intended to convey.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a very fair perspective, because that is approving the handbooks. That was the way that you got to make sure that that happened.
Right.
So I hear what you're saying in terms of you would want to make sure if whatever is identified as in this case, as an operational piece, you can be assured that it aligns with the board policy appropriately.
Yes.
Okay, and I think that's something I'll think about. How would we be able to make sure that we present that to you so that you have an opportunity to weigh in with, maybe without looking at all of the handbooks, if that makes sense.
Right.
That's good feedback. Thank you.
Anyone else? Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but maybe kind of more of a deep question is when you're looking at a handbook and you're setting policies, I mean, we're a governing body here in a sense, but we'd have to conform with state and federal laws. So if somebody's looking at it just from the outside, what would be, your explanation of, quote unquote, the power of the district or the school board versus state or federal law and how that would work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if you were to look at that from, let's say from the bullying perspective, I'm just using that as the example. So there's federal items, right? There's also a state requirement for us to have that policy. So within that section of the handbook, I believe we are to reference those items, but that is where we would make it explicit. What is the district decision making process? So what are the things that the district is able to determine? And what are the things that are legally required? So for example, in some areas of the handbook right now, if it relates to either a human rights issue or a Title IX investigation issue, we list the human rights officer or the Title IX officer there. And that shows that, yes, there's some district level expectations, but we're also following those appropriate other governmental agency requirements by making sure that people know who to contact in those circumstances. Is that helpful, Jeff?
Good. Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Dr. Hellman. Okay, next item E is our policy committee recommendations. And Dr. Hellman, you have some recommendations on policy 203 and 902.
Yes, I'm going to start with 902 because Erin Bailey has hung around for a while. If there are any questions for that, I want to dismiss her. So Erin, would you come up just in case there are any questions? So policy 902 is our district facility use policy. And so we're required to bring this to the board each year. Typically, what we would do is we would bring it at this time of the year. A lot of times now we'll put it in the consent grouping because there aren't going to be a ton of changes year to year. This is also one of the very few policies where it is required for the board to adopt the procedures as well, because it does govern things like fees. And so this year's changes are frankly very simple. Erin, would you just overview the modest changes that were done this year?
Sure, they were very modest and mainly some cleanup items from adding facilities into the mix. And so some of the moves included moving the Greenvale Park Gym from its listing of a smaller, what would have been considered a small gym into a medium gym, and then including the Northfield Community Education Center's gym into a small gym. And then just a lot of cleanup of switching community services to community education in the document as well.
Very good. Thank
So
you.
there were a few items, that were modified, for example, under long-term contracts, both rental fees and energy fees are negotiated. So that's a change in the terms and conditions and the procedures, which is why most of it is very, very high level, but there are a couple of minor things that we felt because we're going to start being able to do some of that negotiating, a couple of other items we wanted you to weigh in.
And then we added the one in the policy, just if we have a facility that would come on off cycle of this, that we would be able to, with consult with the school board chair, the superintendent and myself, be able to add that facility should it come on in November, say, instead of March, so that we are able to manage that.
And to be clear, we have no plans right now to add any facilities, but this is something that we did learn the last time, right? When the new Greenvale Park came online. So we'd prefer to address it now so that down the road, if that comes into play, that there's a mechanism to be able to address it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, Jeff?
Oh, sorry. Ladies first, go ahead.
I just was a little confused by the fee structure. And why, we have the rental fee and the energy fee, and why we just don't combine them together into one fee.
So the energy fee that Amy is referring to is in the class 2. And so the reason we don't combine them is for class 2, which is our nonprofit community organizations. We charge the rental fee for the first 2 hours and the energy fee for all of the hours. So if they rent for 8 hours, they're paying that energy fee for all of the hours, but they're not paying the rental fee for the whole time period, which is why they're not combined. But they are combined in class 3 and 4 because they are paying that fee for the entirety of the rental. Does that make sense? For whatever the total hours are.
Just to make sure I understand.
Mhm.
So that group only pays for the first 2 hours rental fee, even if they use it for 8 hours,
Correct.
but they use energy fee to. Okay,
The whole
got
thing.
it. That's
Yep.
good.
That's really to support, it's been in an effort to support those nonprofit organizations that we have in our community.
Good. Okay, Jeff?
Just a general comment on overall gym spaces where we're at and supply versus demand, how, maybe you're seeing how we're using those as a district, and do we have demand? I mean, do we have enough gym spaces? And I also think as, strategic partners that maybe been great in the past, Carlton, within Northfield Basketball Association and doing things when necessarily Carlton's on break and things like that, but just kind of an overlook of what your thought is on gym spaces.
Well, the community education department's going to breathe a sigh of relief because it's mid-March and we're starting to move out of indoor spaces because we are coming to the end of the busiest time for indoor use. So the number of days that we do not have something in a district facility is very limited. Without having a church rental right now, Sundays are not as booked, but they're almost every other day there would be something happening somewhere in a district facility. Gyms are certainly of the utmost requested spaces. I think especially as we've seen, as we exit more out of COVID, those not only have district programs come back, for us at Community Ed, we still have higher numbers right now than we did pre-pandemic. And so the need that we have for gym space is high. And I think that's also true for associations that are accessing gym space too. So gyms are of a premium. They are booked fully every night from early November till about now.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Erin.
So this is first reading. We're not asking this approval tonight. We'll ask you to approve it at the next meeting.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
And thanks for letting us have 902 go first so we can have Erin get home. Policy 203. So this is back to the regular. So 902 is something that we're required to do every year around this time to set those fees for the next fiscal year. 203, we are back to the regular cycle. So our goal is to look at every policy every 5 years with the policy committee. So this year, this is just it is up on the regular cycle. So we're back to kind of the beginning of it. And what you'll see is in the policy 203, it's the operations of the school board. And so these are recommendations and suggestions from the policy committee. I'll highlight a few of them. Number one is codifying the fact that one of the board's major responsibilities is to hire the superintendent, delegate operational responsibilities, and evaluate them as outlined in policy 302. So there's some language changes around the learning environment, establishing a learning environment for education by providing necessary buildings and equipment. We're adding materials and staffing to support instructional process. The rest of that is the same. If you look at some of the other changes, you will see that we, in some areas around filling vacancies, we are just looking at seeking guidance from the Minnesota School Boards Association, of course, following the statute, but seeking their guidance just to make sure that we're understanding those things don't happen all that often. School Board Association is a great resource for that. You will also notice modest change about the appointing the standing committees, just recognizing that there are years where we can't make those appointments until the second meeting in January. Another part that we have looked at here is around just looking at the position of chair. And the School Boards Association provides some real substantial training for board members. And so the recommendation coming forward would be that in almost all cases, the chair should have completed all 4 phases of that board training prior to serving as the chair. Now, if there is a board member if we are in a situation where there's a the board determines there's not a member who qualifies, the board could waive that requirement based on a majority vote. And then that appointed chair would commit to completing those phases within the first year. We think governance training is good, and just making sure that as chairs come in, that they have that background, we think is a positive thing in what we would call board development. We also just highlight some pieces around the vice chair, some modest pieces there. And then I think if you look down further and you get down to the agenda preparation and dissemination, we just codified how items of business can be suggested. We basically mimicked what is in public comment. So to make sure that wasn't clear before that a business or a property owner who might not necessarily be a resident could make those suggestions. A property owner who pays taxes here on a business but doesn't live here previously couldn't suggest items for consideration. So we modified that. As you know, nearly all of the time we publish all of the materials on Thursday for a board meeting on Monday. The agenda must be posted on Thursday, right? That's the requirement. We typically also post all of those other materials on Thursday. Once in a great while, there's something that is really necessary for the packet that if we just wait till Friday morning, we could have it. And so we're just saying as late as Friday in special circumstances agreed upon the superintendent and the board chair. And I can assure you that is a safety valve. It is not the regular way we would do it, but once in a great while, we'll have something that comes up where just waiting until the next day would make the most sense, still giving people plenty of time to have those items. But this is an important policy, so I just wanted to make sure that we reviewed those recommended changes. Again, no vote tonight. This is first reading, so if people have questions or feedback, we can certainly take that back and potentially bring back an updated policy at the next meeting.
Very good. Okay, questions or comments? Okay, Amy.
So I have comments on 2 parts. For the first comment I have is on section 3, responsibilities of the board. I would like to add a responsibility. So responsibility X, I guess it would be. And that responsibility I would like to add is advocate for the school district within the community and state. I'm not saying it has to be a legislative advocate, but we should all be advocating for our school district. And so then the second, unless someone has a question on that, the second comment I have is on the officers. So that's 6, and then B1, I'm talking about the chairperson. And if you look under E of that, it says, where is it? That the chairman serves as an ex officio member on all of the committees, which I think we either need to change that to say and can attend them as desired, because right now it implies that as an ex officio member, they should be attending every meeting, and I don't think Claudia is up for that. Or
We have enough time for her to do all those things, yes.
or somehow change that, and maybe I can leave that to the committee to decide how best to change that, but it doesn't seem like it's how we're actually doing things right now.
This is why we review the policies at least every 5 years.
Okay, thank you very much. We are going to move on to item F, which is Dr. Hillman's strategic plan update. Operations and strategic plan update.
Yes, and so we have a number of obviously heavy intellectual items on tonight's agenda. So you're going to notice that my report is really highlighting just a couple of really great areas. The first area I want to highlight is Youth Bank. So I had an opportunity to attend the Youth Bank annual awards ceremony. And just, I won't read what I've written. The bottom line is that when we talk about preparing students for lifelong success, some of these non-academic activities just do a tremendous amount more than what we could ever replicate in a classroom. And so Youth Bank is an organization that is overseen by HCI. It is a youth board that has access. This year they had access to just under $20,000 in funds to be able to provide grants to other youth to improve their community here in Northfield. And so you can see that grants were awarded to the Mayor's Youth Council, to the District Youth Council, to the Black Student Union for a field trip to the Rondo neighborhood, a Latinx Affairs Committee that is getting started at the high school, funding some of the mighty Hucks Ultimate Frisbee to waive some fees and help them with some transportation. That's a student-based activity that if you've never watched Ultimate Frisbee, it's pretty awesome. And this is an opportunity for them as a community-based group to be able to have some ability to bring in some more students. A really cool, something called More Water, a high school hydration project that really is raffling off water bottles and doing public service to help students understand the value of making sure you get enough water each day. It's around the wellness component towards students supporting students. And so this was just a joy to be there to see these young people who have the safe amount of pressure, right? I think it's important to put students in situations where they can have a safe amount of pressure that gives them experience for the future. And so we're very grateful to the group of people who have funded these, like Carleton College, the City of Northfield, Community Resource Bank, HCI, the school district, because I believe we're the fiscal host for this, right, Val, for Youth Bank. We used to be, okay, HCI is now. So, but the work that we've done in kind, Northfield shares wings and Youth Prize. So these students have to evaluate these grant applications. They have to determine, does it meet the criteria? They have to determine how much they're going to fund them. And then they have the whole opportunity of how do they make sure that those dollars get distributed. And so it's just a wonderful example of community partnership and how we're able to give students these really amazing experience, but not in a classroom, right? It's something that is different. It's in a way that they are able to actually apply some of the skills that they have learned. So just really wonderful to be at that Youth Bank presentation. And then our winter activities have had an amazing run of success. And so I think that this time of year, for people who remember that great old show, the ABC's Wide World of Sports, that show had the mantra of, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And so we had our team just do so well this winter. Ella Pagel winning her second consecutive state wrestling championship. So as you know, last year was the first year that there was a girls state wrestling tournament. Ella Pagel has won the first two state tournaments. Pretty exciting, right? And I do think that her name is going to be one that goes down in history, right? Is helping open this sport to far more people than it had been before. Kaylee Graber won her first state wrestling championship as well. And we had three students, Keith Harner, Owen Murphy, and Ryan Kuiper, coincidentally, all middle schoolers, I understand, who qualified for the state wrestling meet as well. And the pictures, Ella and Kaylee there. We had Ali Malika and Bella Presnell qualify for the state gymnastics meet. Sam Folland qualified for the state Nordic ski meet. The Northfield High School boys swim team did an amazing job this year. They qualified for both state championships. So swimming has a true team state championship, and then they have a regular state championship that is just all of the people who qualified. And so that's pretty impressive that they were able to take sixth at the state high school league championship and then third at the true team. I have been going to activities for a long time. I am not sure I remember an event outside of Northfield that was better attended than the state quarterfinal boys hockey game against Orono last Wednesday night at the Xcel Energy Center. When I tell you that Northfield showed up, they showed up big time, and it was super fun. A very exciting game. So unfortunate that we lost 2-1 with Orono scoring with about 30 seconds left in the first overtime. You could just feel the heartbreak. But what a run. The Minnesota State High School hockey tournament is one of the most coveted high school tournaments in the country. And for our team to have made it there for the second time since 2017, just a great run. So congratulations to that wonderful run. Our Alpine ski team also sent 3 skiers to the state meet. And then Northfield High School Knowledge Bowl team, I love announcing this is superintendent of schools, continue our domination and are sending 2 teams to the state competition. Each region is able to send 3 teams. There have been years where all 3 teams from our region came from Northfield. And for 6 consecutive years, we have sent teams to the state competition, and we did win the meet just a couple of years ago. So just, I think sometimes you get into the winter, there's a lot of activity going on. To stop and take stock of the wonderful success that our student athletes and activities participants have had. And while of course the wins and the losses are things that, as a society, the life lessons that people learn from this were very powerful as well. So congratulations to Activities Director Bubba Sullivan at the high school, all of the coaches, all of the student athletes, all the parents who really make it work. Just a wonderful season for Northfield, something we really needed right after a few years of some disrupted winter activities. So that is the report.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Any comments or questions? Jeff?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so many sports, so many activities to talk about. Obviously, the hockey team was awesome, but I mean, thanks for giving that detailed list of all things that are going on. But whether it's 6 through 12, whether it's a sport or activity, get excited about doing something, get out and try some different things. That's the time to do that, whether you're good at it or whether you're not. I mean, you can find that out. And some of those sports turn into great, lifetime sports. I played a football. It's not exactly a great lifetime sport, but tennis and golf. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do for a lifetime that are some great lifetime sports. So we had that in college. I just noticed that in college, we had a section just called Lifetime Sports. And it was just a lot of things like that you could do over a lifetime. So right now, maybe in high school or middle school, your opportunities play some of these team sports that you might have not the opportunity in the future. So get on it and try some different things out, whether you're good or bad at it.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Hellman. We are going to move on to item 6, which is the consent grouping. As a reminder, there was some personnel items in the table file added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping for separate consideration? Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Moved by Jeff, second. And by Robert. Anita, will you facilitate a roll call vote?
Butler,
Aye.
Coleman,
Aye.
Gerwitz,
Aye.
Gonzalez, George,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Nelson,
Aye.
Quinnell,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you, Anita. Okay, item 7 is our items for individual action, and we have one item tonight, and that is the modification of the superintendent focus area. Okay, let's see. The superintendent will facilitate the redesign of the district student handbooks, presenting a draft to the board by March 30th, 2023, and we're changing that to June
30th, yes.
30th.
And
Okay.
Yep, no, good.
I will take a motion and then we'll hear from Dr. Hellman and take any questions at that point. Is there a motion to approve the modification as presented? Okay, moved by Corey, second by Jenny. Okay, Dr. Hellman, do you want to make some comments?
Yeah, I just take these focus areas very seriously. So when I see that there's something, it's okay to have a stretch goal, right? And if you don't think you're going to make it, I just want to bring that to you and receive your permission to be able to have an extended time period. So I've already gone through why, but I would appreciate that change to the annual plan.
Okay, are there any comments or questions about that? Sure. No? Okay. We have a motion. Will Anita, will you facilitate a roll call vote on that?
Butler,
Aye.
Coleman,
Aye.
Gerwitz,
Aye.
Gonzalez, George,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Nelson,
Aye.
Quinnell,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, item 8 is item 8 is items for information, and we have an enrollment report. Dr. Hellman, will you present?
Yes, and I'll bring it up here on the screen. So I just want to point out, I'm going to keep this on the screen for a moment, then I have to unplug to go back to my email for some discussion. So you'll notice that you're going to see compared to last month, we are down a total of 14 students. And so you can just see that general piece there. I'm going to unplug so I can go back to my email because I have the list of the reasons. Because what we're anticipating is if we do see a month-to-month drop, we are going to bring you the data about what is encompassed in that, just so we're very clear up front. So what we have had is of those, it's even a little bit more. You're to see it's a little bit more because of the way that it works. But we did have in these numbers, you're seeing one. It doesn't add to 14, but trust me, it's got a number of other components with it. Non-public, one student went there. One student ended up going to a non-public. If a student doesn't attend for 15 consecutive days, this is the ALC part where some students who are not, you're seeing most of this in the ALC, where if they are coming for some of their credit recovery, but people don't attend for 15 consecutive days, we're required to drop them from our rolls. So we had 12 students in that scenario that month. We had one student graduate early. And so that's something that, and that you will see that that can happen with the ALC from time to time after one of their grading periods. The student has amassed enough credit so they have graduated. And once they graduate, they still can graduate at the end of the year, but they've achieved that graduation at that point. We did have 4 students move out, and we did have one student who was able to move to Prairie Creek. So there is a drop in the number of students. Some of it is the actual number of the month to month, but then there's some of the data that is part of those non-full-time students. So those are the reasons for students who are no longer enrolled as they were over the last month. So we're just going to try, if we see that drop, we're going to tell you what the reason is. If it's helpful for board members, I'd be happy to also bring, when we see an increase each month, to say we had 4 move-ins or we had people who came from a non-public. If that kind of detail is helpful, I'm happy to have Chris Nessett provide it for us every month.
Very good. Thank you. Comments or questions? Amy?
So I'm a little confused because it looks like the ALC numbers increased by 16 and you're saying 14 people dropped. So does you mean 14 people dropped out of the high school to the ALC?
No, what I'm saying is that you can have a net, right? So the fact is that I'm looking at, I think some of those drops probably are coming from the overall total that includes the part-time or independent ALC students, which would not be reflected in those numbers at the top.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Anyone else? Comment or question? All right, thank you for that report. Item 9 is our future meetings. We have this Thursday, March 16th at 6 p.m. a public meeting at the Northfield Middle School. The following Thursday, March 23rd, 6 p.m. also another public meeting at Northfield Middle School. Then Monday, April 10th and Monday, April 24th, 6 p.m. are regular meetings here in the district office boardroom. All right, that is all the business that we have for tonight.
Could
I'm
I,
sorry.
could I explain the public meeting
Oh,
format?
sure.
So I just, if it's okay, so on the 2 public meetings, I just think it would be good for the board to hear, and for people who are thinking about coming to one of the public meetings, just what the format will be. We had originally listed it as 6 to 8. I think it's likely it will go a little bit past that until probably around 8:30. So I just want to share that with people. We have updated that on the website and we'll include that. I mean, of course, people can come and leave as they so choose. They don't have to stay the whole time. So what will happen is when people come in at 6 o'clock, we'll gather in the middle school auditorium, and then Val and I will provide a presentation. Now, for board members, I understand that our discussion about the reasons that we are in this budget process are probably getting tiresome because you have heard us say it over and over and over and over again. But we'll need you to indulge us further because remember, people come to this conversation at different points. And it's really important to ground people in the reasons why we're talking about this. So Val and I will give about a 20 to 25-minute presentation. We will not take questions at that presentation because I can tell you what will happen. We'll be there for another. So what we want people to do is then we will shift. We have the ability to have up to 7 rooms if need be, or a few less, up to 4 rooms. Depending on how many people are there, you'll have 1 to 2 board members. The most we could have would be 3 board members in 1 room. Last year, as I recall, I think we had 3 or 4 rooms total. And then administrators will also be there on Thursday night. And so administrators will be in each room as well to help facilitate the conversation. We will use to the best of our ability what we call the nominal process, which we will go around the room and ask anyone who is there if they have feedback about the budget proposal. So it could be that you go to the first person and they really want to talk about a particular piece. It'll be the administrator's job to help make sure that we facilitate keeping people on time while making sure that we honor what their comments are. And then once you have already shared something, you're not going to be allowed to share something else until everyone else who has wanted to share something has the chance. We want to have that smaller group setting because there are going to be people who will be more comfortable sharing in a smaller group than having to come to a public open mic, if that makes sense. So that is the next segment. Then we will reconvene in the middle school auditorium and we will have a public comment style approach. We've got about 45 minutes planned for it roughly. And in that case, normally we give people 3 minutes just to facilitate people having the opportunity of getting more people to speak. We'll give people a 2-minute limit there. And we will have an administrator or administrative assistant. Anita helped us with that last year to be able to help people time. Again, we want to be able to have people give us as much feedback as possible. So we did that last year with the 2-minute part and it did work well. 2 minutes actually is quite a lot of time if you think about it, if you are organized. And so that isn't taking it down from the 3 minutes to 2 minutes is just to give a handful more of people who would like to speak. Board members during that last part, during that presentation or those public comment style comments will be seated on the stage. We've looked at, could we put you down, not on the stage? It just doesn't work very well. We want you to be on the stage so that people who are able, and that you're able to see folks. We are going to make sure we work on the microphone. I know there was a microphone issue last year. We're going to make sure that that is squared away to the best of our ability. And then at the end, we will allow board members a chance to do a brief reflection. So you don't have to do that, right? If you have taken in a lot of information and you just really want to soak it in before you make any comments, you can certainly just say something along those. I appreciate people hearing people tonight, and I'm really taking, your feedback into account. If there are things that you listen to that strike you in a way, right, that you are ready to say, I'm really happy to have heard about this issue. This is something that I was really grateful to hear that perspective on. We've got about a half an hour planned for that. That will be the last segment. We would, of course, stay as long as board members would choose to do so, but we want to try to keep it tidy. It's something that for you to have an opportunity to provide any initial reflections. Again, you're not required to, but we just want you to have an opportunity, and for the public who is considering coming to hear what the format is. We've used this format in other circumstances before, and this mix of different ways of providing feedback has really worked well. There are people who really want to have that larger public audience to be able to share their perspectives. They are very comfortable public speaking. We have other people who really would never sign up for that. And we want to make sure we provide them a place for the board to hear their voice, even though it's not the whole board. They're having some members of the board be able to hear their voice. And then, of course, you can report to each other at the debrief session on what you heard. So thank you for letting me just explain that. I know that we've shared about that via email, but just sharing it out loud. If people have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Questions or comments? Corey?
So you kind of touched it on there at the end, but during the board reflection time last year, we did report back what happened in the room, the conversation. It sounds like that's not required this time. I'm guessing you'll share that next Thursday. So those who are in those rooms who maybe don't have their thoughts reflected at the broader conversation know that they're still being heard because they'll be shared
Absolutely.
among the board. Okay, thank you.
And I think board members, I think it would be, if board members can provide a brief overview, that's great. And then the reflection part, you might not be ready to, and that's okay. But I do think if you are able to share some of the high level topics that were brought forward, that would be a great summary. So thank you for activating my memory on that.
Any other comments or questions?
And we really want the public to come out. We need to hear from you, right? These are difficult decisions that are before the board. And we need, as the public's elected representatives, we need people to come forward and give us feedback about what is important to you.
Okay, that's all the business that we have for tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Jeff, second by Corey. Anita, will you facilitate a roll call vote?
Butler,
Aye.
Coleman,
Aye.
Gerwitz,
Aye.
Gonzalez George,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Nelson,
Aye.
Quinnell.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. We're adjourned.